I'm going to watch it go live, and I'm just going to go and introduce and do everything. As soon as I can see it's going live. Hi, you're with Scott. I'm Ganjikidd. It's midnight. It's always midnight. This is your right here. And your left here. I'm here again with Steve. This is Thus. Last time we talked about true crime and our fascination with the macabre world of murder. Today we're going to chase down the topic of crime. Steve of the Dead, forensic criminologist, is my co-host, and together we'll be chasing down crime, slamming it against the wall and demanding some answers. We're going to talk about what crime is, how we define it, and how those definitions change. We're going to ask, are criminals born, or does society cultivate crime? Before finally we look about how your rights could become crimes. So stick around for that. Hi Steve, how are you? And how are those
I'm good. I was tempted to do a, what up YouTube, it's your boy sort of intro, but you fed nicely into it there, so I didn't get the chance.
Did I say this is thus a podcast about how people think, feel and behave? I don't know if I said that. That's also one of them.
No, you skimmed that one.
Okay, that's one of them. But yeah, so I don't know if you know everyone. I've got Steve's channel above me here today. He's done another 7-hour video this week, so he's had a good rest after that, and I've had a good rest after watching it. It's been a wild ride. So make sure you check in with that.
Well earned rest, Scott. Earned.
And today we're going to talk about something slightly different, aren't we?
Yes. We're going to talk about actual criminals rather than just assaults on personality.
So yeah, today's big question is crime. So we'll go straight into it. If you're ready, you're ready. I'm ready. Yeah. Hello, Bob in chat. Oh, I will say we've crossed another little milestone in the channel in that we can do community posts when we hit 500. Yeah, that's a new thing. When we hit, I don't know if I can be bothered to do them, but when we hit 500 on the Ganjikidd channel, Kipper channel, when we hit 500 subs, we can unlock another aspect of community posting, I think. And I think when we hit 1,000, we can unlock memberships and stuff like that. And when we get to that, the questions that get asked in chat, that get super chats and things, will get immediate attention. I'm going to put them straight on the scoreboard, and we're going to go right, give you top priority. But until then, your chat will come. You'll be on the screen. If it's pertinent, Steve can activate chat and type in and answer. But otherwise, I'll let the conversation flow, and I'll take questions from chat more towards the end. So sorry. First big question today then of Steve, my forensic criminologist expert, is what is crime?
I have to define. I'm a forensic psychologist, not criminologist. Slightly different field of study.
They're all the same words to me until we define them in today's episode. So
they are all part of the social sciences, because we're going to be dipping in for that, because we're going to talk a lot about sociology as well. But yeah, your definition of crime is one of the bigger questions. Like your various different sociological and criminological perspectives will all have different definitions of crime, but like one of the things that's most common amongst these definitions is an act of transgression. It's either against the individual or against the state or against like society as a whole, but various acts that involve sort of like a transgression upon a person, for example, like an assault or a robbery. An act of violence inherent there typically defines a crime. What also defines a crime is that there's usually an offender and a victim, which seems fairly obvious to say, but it's normally a victim, and there's normally the absence of an authoritative, well, not necessarily authoritative, but a figure that can intervene in some way, a guardian angel, as it were. And that doesn't necessarily have to be an agent of the state. It doesn't necessarily have to be the police or a figure of authority. It could be someone walking past. So, you and I could be guardian angels if we happen to walk past somebody being, held up. It's just that sort of thing. Typically, the absence of that enables a crime to be committed between a victim and an offender. Harm and transgressions and those sorts of things all sort of typically involved in acts of crime or what
this is how we end up with 7-hour videos from you, isn't it? Because I thought you were going to give me the dictionary definition. I'm pretty sure that's not what it says in the dictionary. I haven't got pages and pages in the dictionary.
That's the YouTube short.
Right. Crime in the dictionary says an action or omission which constitutes an offence and is punishable by law. So I thought that was really vague in the dictionary. I think we're going to get a much more detailed answer from you, to be honest.
It's just sort of plucking at the strings of the description, sort of going, well, okay, what does it mean? What does it say that?
So, how do we construct these ideas about what's a law? And like, I'll give you like these big open questions at the start, and then we'll get deeper into it. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to give me sort of a potted history of human morality. So this might feed into that. I know it's easy, just the easy ones first.
This is how I get 7-hour videos.
Well, we're going to go for about 3.5 today. If unless you want to keep pushing, I'm fine with that. But yeah, so what do you think? Tell me how we construct these ideas about what is a law, a crime, what sits outside it, what's right and wrong, essentially. I'm asking you to just define right and wrong, I guess, am I?
Yeah, sort of. But those are things that are sort of relative through time. As things have changed through time, many acts and behaviours and things that we would now consider normal and okay and acceptable would have been crime. So as societies shift, sort of change, the ideas of what constitutes a crime are also constantly changing and evolving to reflect the culture of the time. But typically there are a couple of crimes that are consistent throughout. Murder is a big one. Murder is typically consistent a crime. Robbery is generally these are things that sort of like violate the individuality and the freedom of the person. So, robbery, sexual assault, murder, again, just generally those sorts of the big crimes, the serious crimes that involve aggravation and aggression, some sort of deprivation of liberty or removal of like possession without consent. That's another thing. Consent is often a key. I don't consent to being robbed. That's why it's a crime. So typically those sorts of things are what societies define as crime. But other things that are sort of less universal, they will shift through time. I mean, a Victorian era person isn't going to be that well up on what constitutes a white collar crime given electronic banking in the 21st century. So legal systems also have to shift to accommodate things like that. I'm sure we'll get into that later when we talk about we'll have a good brief discussion of the interplay between the police and criminals as things go on.
Mm-hmm.
The arms race between the two, but quite a turn of phrase, but generally, yeah.
So yeah, going back then, let's say we go back in time to sort of early days. What would have given, do you think, or maybe I'll make a suggestion, you can critique it. I would have thought that in the early days, we didn't, like I'm talking about, early humans, first civilizations. We probably didn't have much of a code of right and wrong. We just sort of went about doing things, and people were happy or unhappy, but there was no judge, jury, or anything like that. And then as we grew socially, I guess ideas about God might have come into it. If you believed in a God, that might have informed your idea of right and wrong. And it seems that most early human civilizations had some sort of, like, whether it was Egyptians had their gods, or early Sumerians, Romans, the Greeks, they had all gods and like theories, didn't they? Greeks started to get into philosophy, so I guess at that point they decided what was right and wrong for different reasons. But what do you think? What was the early inception of, like, this is a right thing and this is a wrong thing for humans?
It would have been evolutionary, wouldn't it? It would have been while we were hunter-gatherer tribes, before civilization. You would have had an idea of what was right and wrong, depending on what harmed your likelihood of survival. So even if you were in a small tribe, if you hurt somebody deliberately, attacked somebody with a spear, and that person was part of the party that went out and hunted food, you are harming the tribe because you are reducing their ability to go and hunt food. So things like that. If you murdered the child, you are harming the members of the tribe. So even though there's no...
So yeah, we would expect then those early humans, the early tribes, the hunter-gatherers, to actually get together and say, we don't like this that you've done. Like, do you think there'd be some sort of natural accountability within the social structure?
Yeah. It wouldn't have been like a sort of like codified system of beliefs, like across a certain geographic region, like we might know it now as like an institution. But there would still have been some sort of way of like exacting, reparation or being punitive towards a member of the tribe that had aggrieved you in some way. So yeah, if we were out hunting as part of the tribe and I murder one of the hunters, when we get back to wherever we've established our camp, I am being punished. I might
maybe ostracized. Yeah.
I would be ostracized. I might be murdered.
And I suppose a way that we could guess what was happening back then, if we don't have like actual written record, is we could probably look at tribes in the Amazon who have their own social code and don't just go around like, you know, doing bad things to each other within the tribe.
There would still be sort of places that we could look for equivalents. We might not have, like you say, suburban historical records, but there are our own equivalents of like remote tribes in the Amazon and places like the North Sentinelese Island, those, you know, remote, really primal tribes. Places like the North Sentinelese haven't even discovered fire yet, but they still obviously have their own moral code as well. So there are broadly some things that have helped us survive and evolve to this point, and one of those things is altruism. It's helping other people. So anything that sort of went against that would others. It wouldn't just harm the individual. It would have a ripple effect. Like I've been using as an example, if I killed another hunter, reduce the ability of the tribe to hunt and gather food, which means there's going to be less food for people, which means there's going to be a greater likelihood that they starve to death.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That you'd be able to see in a much smaller community that your actions hurt everyone and yourself. Like you'd be able to feel the impact by having less food. Like, you know, there'd be a much more you get a much more direct feedback response, whereas in our wider societies people do things and they might not have that direct impact, but it might still have an impact on the wider society and themselves. It's quite an interesting idea, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it's a reflection of like how big and complex society has become. You know, can be more distant from a victim of your crime. Say if you work as a banker and you skim money from people's accounts, you might not feel the impact of that money being gone, but the people whose accounts they are, when they come to withdraw that money, they're going to.
So I wanted to also touch on this idea of biblical morality, that, you know, through history up until really quite recent times, we've had this idea in the West. We're gonna give a like general, you know, concept view, if you want, of some other countries and why we're going to focus on the West today. Hello, Squirrel Sniper in chat. But in the West, we've generally had through some religious conflict, I guess, a sort of Roman Catholic Christian overview of morality. What was on those slabs that Moses had, that's the sort of general law, and we're going to go with that and, you know, construct things around that. But recently, and more recently, I think only 30% of people in the UK now believe in a God of any description or consider themselves strongly religious. So more and more we don't have that to rely on. So I'm just going to ask you to give me, you know, some thoughts about how we move from God being the arbiter of justice to not having that and having to make our own decisions on what's right and wrong.
Like you said, it's a relatively recent thing. We say recent and we, you know, defining recent, but talking like the last 200 years compared to thousands of years of history, and definitely at least several hundred of Judeo-Christian Rome, the Catholic domination of most of the West. But a lot of this, like many things in the social sciences, comes back to the Industrial Revolution, comes back to the Enlightenment and the age of like science dawning, because you have a couple of key writers around that time who start to really sort of look at how crime is dealt with and how people are punished. Because up till this point, mostly it's punitive. You are punishing a person, you know, and it's not always execution. Sometimes it's branding, or it's maiming, it's cutting, you know, a hand, or it's putting somebody in the stocks or debtor's prison. It's making it you are extracting upon their body a punishment for a crime. And as this goes on, more and more people start to think, well, hang on, the barbarity of this is quite disturbing, because these are huge public events as well. The second aspect of it is you want it to be public. You want it to act deterrent. You want to show people this is what happens if you are a highwayman. This is what happens if you are a murderer. This is what happens if treason. You want to make these things huge spectacles, so the suffering happens public. So,
and that would be to put people off committing future criminal acts. Like, this could be you, sort of thing.
It could be your head on a spike outside London Gate. Yeah.
Just briefly, how do you think that compares to today's deterrence? Do you think it's more? I imagine it probably would be like, you know, today we worry about going to prison. We worry about effects on, you know, our family, maybe things like that. But putting your head on a spike, that's pretty brutal. That might put more people off, maybe, or.
I would hope that many people would see it as a return to a barbaric day that we long since passed.
Oh, I'm not suggesting we do it now. No,
Yeah.
I was just thinking back then. Attitudes to
Back then,
crime.
yeah, it would have been. It would have been a terrifying thing. But then again, back then, death was a bit more common, wasn't it? It wasn't this sort of distant thing that we only have to worry about when we get into our 60s and 80s. It's a thing where you work in the field, your diet is great, and or you're part of like a dangerous trade. You might be a smith working with like incredibly hot molten metals and things. So there's various ways that you can meet your end, and that's assuming you survived through childhood in the first place. So seeing a head on a spike is probably a deterrent, but in terms of like the shock impact of it, might not be as much as we think it is. I don't know. This is just conjecture.
Certainly not something we carry on with today. But so we had this much more brutal aspect of crime and punishment back then.
Yeah, because it was punitive. Because the idea was to punish. You weren't. There was no real sort of thought of rehabilitation of the offender. But around the sort of like dawn of the Enlightenment, a couple of writers, Jeremy Bentham, Cesare Beccaria, who sort of start to question the way things are done in terms of prison. Beccaria is the one who writes that punishment should be seen to be, implemented equally. It should apply to everybody equally. It should be seen to be public. It should be seen to be swift, but it should also be seen to be merciful. He opposed the death penalty. Tactic, torture, and Bentham argued for utilitarianism. He's most famous for the philosophy of utility. The greatest good for the greatest number is the sort of arbiter of what's right and wrong and what's moral. Whereas he also wrote about prison reform, and he wrote about rehabilitation. He even designed a prison called the Panopticon, which an institution where people could not hide. All prisoners would be under observation times. But the point of that was that they're supposed to engage in reflection and quiet contemplation and rehabilitate through rumination on their character.
We certainly will come on to prisons and police in further episodes, I'm sure. So unless I'm interjecting on something that you got prepared here.
No.
I just want to move you slightly more to how society's decided to, I think before it would have been quite straightforward. God said this was right and wrong, so it's right and wrong. We've got some arguments as to how we're going to implement that. Maybe we never expect the Spanish Inquisition, but
nobody
expects Spanish Inquisition. But aside from burning witches and some real extreme forms of stuff that was going on, like the general construct of crime was you don't steal from each other, you don't kill. You've got these laws, they're written from the church, and we know what we're up to. But then the church sort of goes away from public consciousness in terms of informing our behaviour. So what's taken over, and why do we decide without God or God's authority? Why do we decide what's right and wrong now? And what do you think made things change, and what's had to fill that void maybe as things changed?
Science, I guess. I mean, this all again the sort of like slow degradation of religious faith in the public sphere, religious influence, sort of happens around the time of the Enlightenment, because people start pushing back on the.
All right, so it totally ties in with what you were saying. Yeah.
It got Darwin and the theory of evolution, and then people start going, well, hang on a minute, that sort of bloke that you locked up under lock and key because he pointed out that the Earth doesn't, that the sun doesn't revolve around the Earth. That Galileo bloke, him. He might have had a point, and so people start to push back against like Catholic religious. Shouldn't really put it down to one faith, but the idea of science being a thing, a way of understanding the world.
But it's really interesting what you say there, that Galileo was a criminal.
Yeah, he was. At the time, he was, because he taught something heretical. He went against the church's dogma. He was touching upon taboo subject when he said, because the Bible teaches the Earth is the center of the universe, and he was like, well, no, we're orbiting the sun, so we can't be. And then if therefore that can't be right, other things in the Bible might not, and therefore the whole thing collapsed. So it's really a bunch of foundations laid upon by him and Newton and people like that sort of established this base that Darwin can stand upon and provide probably the biggest piece of evidence against what the Bible says in the theory of evolution. And then at that point on, everything starts to become open to question and scientific inquiry, and the scientific model of question and adapt, revise, pose your hypothesis, test, experiment, collect your result. Everything starts to be examined, and that includes the way we handle criminals, and that also includes criminals themselves. So that changes our approach to, maybe it shouldn't just be punitive, maybe it shouldn't be punishment, but maybe we should look at what makes a criminal and whether they're even ultimately culpable, for their behavior. I mean, if you're born a criminal, you're being criminalized for something you can't stop because you're born with it. So one of the biggest questions in criminology and forensic psychology comes up there.
So later on, we're going to, just after this little section, our next section is going to be, once we've decided how we know what's right and wrong, we're going to ask, why do people do the right and wrong things? So I really understand what you're saying now, is that the breakdown of religion happened as like this, as you say, this phase of enlightenment where different people did lots of different things that sort of shook the foundations, changed the way people thought. And initially, some of them were even defined as criminals by the church themselves. And then what happened when the church stepped away from our public thinking and decision making is that science took up the mantle, and people started to say that we're not just going to take what we're told, we're going to go and investigate, and we're going to find out. And it's really interesting that we talk about these people like Darwin and Newton, but at the same time you were mentioning some people who had ideas about crime and psychology, the way we think, and I guess these were the first, like the pioneers of these new sciences, I guess.
Yeah, well, they're often they're not quite the big four of sociology that have become Durkheim, Jemima, Weber. Yeah, these are certainly people who are influential in criminology and forensic psychology, more so criminology, to be fair, and sociology, because of what they did at the time. Beccaриa's treatise on the application of law and justice is like the first real piece of penal reform. It's the first argument for penal reform, at least that still exists. Might have been earlier ones, but the paper's 75. So he's generally credited as being the first. And you also have to consider, I do feel like I should have pointed out, that not only have you got like the absence of religion slowly moving away, but you also have a change from a feudal system to a capitalist one. Because up until that point, you still have the divine right of kings. Mm-hmm. You have the law being a reflection of his or her majesty's pleasure. So when that shift starts happening as well, the law becomes more the will of the people. It becomes the voice of the people rather than the voice of the king. It's how the people and society express their norms, their beliefs, and their displeasure, and what their punishment should be for people who transgress. So not only do you have this like social upheaval in terms of science replacing religion, but you also have democracy replacing feudalism. You have, as the Industrial Revolution really kicks in and capitalism really sort of like redistributes wealth and diminishes the influence of kings in society. Obviously, America has a democracy as well. America never really had to deal with that sort of social upheaval with kings being replaced, but most countries in the West have definitely had to deal with it at some point, where your royal family slowly loses influence. But your ability to have a say through politicians who you vote based on the mandates they give, and you say, right, I approve of your laws, or your laws and what you think should be laws align mostly with my ideals, so I'll vote for you. Or you write to your MP saying, hey, I disagree with this law, I think you should change this law.
Yeah, it's only since we had a sitting parliament, or in America a senate, or whatever they have. It's only since we have that we've decided to let people have a say and decide what the laws are and what is and is not a crime. And until then, God decided, the king decided, but I guess as a common person, you would have just got on with what day to day was right and wrong was decided, and you would have got on with it, I guess. But so now we've got a system. I've got my notes here, and I did share them with you, so I'm just going to go back to them here. I wanted to highlight on homosexuality as an example of past morals that changed. Yeah. Because I wanted to just like look at some things that might have changed over time that we can give as examples. So I'm pretty sure that back when the Catholic Church was, burning witches and whatever, like being gay was definitely a crime. and sodomy, etc. And it's definitely not now. So there's been like a process of change, and that's happened through laws and courts and politics, I would say.
Yeah. I suppose in the political field, you can also include like just general social and cultural attitude towards it as well, because obviously that's how those things filter through each other. Politics is the reflection of the beliefs of the culture at the time. So as things change culturally, they then change legally. So as you can see in America, cannabis is a great example in America because more and more people are using it, so more and more take it back to homosexuality. It's only recently in the last 70 or 80 years, Turing was like given, I think Turing committed suicide in 1954, I think. Should know that, from Manchester. There's Alan Turing Way, there's a statue of him. But he's like a very famous example of somebody whose sexuality was criminalized, and today that is unconscionable in Western society. I know homosexuality is still illegal in many countries across the world, but again, that is a thing that is slowly changing over time. Cultural changes and legal changes are things that sadly take a long time to happen, but they do happen. We are talking relatively recent, but relatively recent for us is going to encompass 50 to 200 years of, again, a multiple 1,000-year clock.
And then there are some things that have to happen very quickly. Like in my notes here, I've put about camera film processing. What I've written is that new offences are aided by technology. So upskirting would not have been a problem in the Edwardian era because camera film processing required a long sitting, and the victim would have been wearing a heavy underskirt and petticoat. So it's just like you couldn't necessarily but nowadays you've got camera phones and stuff. So all of a sudden you had Parliament saying, right, we're not going to have this. That's going in the crime bucket. That's a crime now. Stop doing that. So you can actually have quite a responsive system. My question to follow that was, how are laws passed and crimes defined today? What's the, like you said, you write to your MP maybe? Could you define for us how things are defined?
Okay.
Or in a short form.
It would have to be through the legislative system. I mean, those are the ways that. But again, you've got cultural influences. So the more people that are victims of upskirting or recognise that it is a serious issue, thanks to efforts made by people to raise awareness of it, will sort of like respond to their MPs. And obviously the more awareness raised, the more people likely to MPs, the more MPs getting letters from their constituents saying, hey, the more MPs bringing it to Parliament. So there are instances where the legal system is quite quick to respond.
And so what it has to do is it has to go into Parliament, and they have to say it's going to be a law that we're not having it anymore. And then once they've said that, as long as there's no argument in Parliament or the House of Lords, I guess it then goes through the House of Lords. A second check. Yeah. But once that's happened, then it's a law. Like, that's it. The police can come around and arrest the upskirters. It's almost like an overnight. They've discussed it. They've said it is. It is. It's almost like a switch is flicked. Now that's not. Now that is a crime. Bang.
Yeah, but I think a distinction we should make here is that that is in response to a technological development, and those can happen very, very quickly. Whereas changing social attitudes towards something like homosexuality is something that took many hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So when the legal system moves quickly, it's often in response to something rather than because change is being brought to it. So outcry over the misuse of technology, or say, for example, legislation about what you could take onto a plane before 9/11, changing after 9/11. Those things happen very, very quickly because they're responses to events, whereas bringing, say, attitudes about euthanasia to MPs to force a change on laws around euthanasia are very, very different, because those things are socio-cultural, and changing takes time.
A quick note on that then. Homosexuality is a good example of this, I think, is that what had to happen is over time, not just that the general society became more accepting, that was one aspect of it, but somehow it had to get into that House of Legislation. Someone had to raise it and say, we want to change the law about it. And so for people to push it to that level, it had to become a movement. There had to be protests. I would say, like the actual, like I want to make sure clearly I state this at the start of the episode, roughly at the start of the episode, so half an hour in, that protest, like protest is like a motif here, isn't it, in law? Like as people, what we do to, like, you could write to your MP might not give a shit, but if you can get enough of you to write on a petition, then they have to discuss it, and if you can get enough of you to march in the street waving the placards, then other people might start getting interested, and it starts to become something that they decide to discuss. Like the sort of barrier line is getting it to be discussed in the House of Commons, isn't it?
Yeah, and the way that you change that is by voting.
Right.
This is why voting is so important.
I said protest, you're saying voting. Do you know what? Where I live, right, you might have a different system where you live, but where I live is that I live in what's called a Tory safe seat. So you go and you vote, and it doesn't matter what you vote because the Conservatives will win. If you vote for Labour or the Green Party or this or that, you put them all together and they don't beat the Conservatives. So like you'd have to have a real shift of ideas where I live for me to have any sort of real say. It's just a feature of our political system, I guess. But I find that I feel like my vote doesn't really get heard so much. I don't know if that's the same way you live.
That's our first past the post system at its finest, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm in a Labour safe seat, so too bad. But
yeah, maybe I should move where you live and just feel happier. Right, but yeah, so there is that. But I was going to alight on this idea of protest as well. That there's because it's going to come back later that there are laws about protesting and there's we're going to come back and discuss it later. So I just wanted to make it clear that I think peaceful, like not smashing things up and creating riots, but peaceful protest is a feature of our democracy, isn't it?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, inherently. But again, those are sort of like rights we've had to fight for over the years, and they're rights that are at risk of being taken away depending on the government in. So they should always be exercised to remind people that you have this right. Use it. So no, I agree. I agree with the point of protest.
We'll talk about it more later then, I guess. Yeah. I've got a question for you then. Do you think today's system is fit for purpose, and how good is it, as an overview, general?
That depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you, Jeff.
I know, but I arranged a variety of perspectives.
Okay.
So, like reformists and abolitionists wouldn't. They would argue that, you should either do more to increase the point of the judicial system and the justice system as a whole to be focused on rehabilitation, such as in Scandinavian countries. The Scandinavian model is an incredible success in terms of reducing the crime rate and recidivism rate of offenders. And it's a system geared around rehabilitation, whereas ours is still fairly punitive. We don't put that much emphasis on rehabilitation, whereas other people would say that no, it's not. We've gone soft. It's like a bloody holiday camp. They get TVs in their cells, they've got PlayStations and Xboxes, and that sort of thing. People, depending on which perspective, which sort of like political leaning you are, you're going to have a very different opinion on how it is because of how it's reflected to you in the media that you consume and your sort of general level of interaction with the political system. So it's also people who say, like, well, is it working as a deterrent as well? Because if your focus isn't on just punitive or rehabilitative, but it's to be seen, the idea of justice is that it's seen, and this is a way of showing people this is what happens when you break the law. So does it work as a deterrent? Maybe if your opinion of prison is that it's a horrible place, it's going to work as a deterrent because you're terrified. Or maybe if you think it's soft, it's easy, it's like a holiday camp, you're not going to be as scared of the threat of prison. So maybe if you have a conceptualization of it as a warm place to sleep at night because you're homeless, you're probably not going to be that afraid of it either as a punishment.
I think there's two aspects.
If you have like,
sorry,
just very quickly. Yeah. If you have like the idea of my freedom and my ability to go where I want as a profound like belief of mine, the threat of that being taken away and you being incarcerated is terrifying enough to keep you out of criminal behavior. So yeah, it depends on your perspective. Personally, I don't think it's fit.
You don't. So I was going to say, like, there's certain different aspects of it, I guess, aren't there? There's the bit where they decide what's going to be a crime and what's not, and that can range from anything from something someone's doing on their computer at home to something someone's doing in the street with a broken bottle and a whatever. Like they decide on these things, and then there's the institution of the police who have to go out and actually literally police it, say, okay, you're doing that bad thing, we're coming around your house. So then you're as a normal person, you don't interact with crime very much. Like if you're not a criminal, you're not doing much crime, and then all of a sudden, like you see the police somewhere or something's happening. So I guess in terms of that, going back to that greater good that we were talking about, that early idea from the tribes, like the general system of, we outline something we think is bad, and then we try and police it within society. As a system, like it's grown through our own social mechanisms, hasn't it? And we've got sort of a say in it. So I don't know how good it is myself. I was asking you, but like as a system, that like I don't know if I could think of anything. Like maybe I could have an artificial intelligence system that was grading people's behaviour, and sort of maybe there could be a different system of, but maybe that would be like worse, like Big Brother. Like there's a funny balance, isn't there, between what we want out of this system in terms of fixing the bad things in society, and what we want as free individuals in terms of not being, 1984 Big Brother Stasi police.
Yeah, that sort of thing has been going back for, again, since pre-Enlightenment, because most of the time beforehand, you didn't really have a say in what laws were passed and how you were sentenced, or how you interacted with the justice as a whole. It would be the right of God, it's the law of God, or it's the law of the king. So it's only recently that we've been able to sort of distinguish that in the first place and go, well, hang on a minute, we're not happy with this sort of level of overreach into our lives. We would like some sort of like a level of privacy, a level of individual autonomy, a way where any sort of behavior that we might think is fine and okay because it's my body and what I put into it is my business, or what happens between me and my consenting partner at home behind closed doors is nobody else's business. Those sorts of things are back and forth all the time through the legal system as it's grown since the Industrial Revolution. But yeah, they seem to be things that are just inherent within us as humans from an evolutionary psychology point of view. Again, those things benefit you because you get the back and forth of, well, if I help you out, you can help me out. If I keep an eye out for you, you'll keep an eye out for me. If we both agree on these things, we're less likely to argue and kill each other.
So you said our system wasn't necessarily fit for purpose. Were you more alluding to the punishment side of things and that sort of things than like, because I think it would be quite difficult. I'm going to not fly the flag for like the police here, not necessarily, but I think it's quite a difficult job to try and actually like we can set out our ideas, we can talk, and that's what we do here is we talk about ideas. So we can talk about ideas, but actually going on the street and saying, right, well, that is wrong, so now we have to do something about it. That's a slightly different question, isn't it? I think Bob Cassidy here in chat as well, talking about the death penalty. And I think what we should do and what we will do is we'll come on to the punishment side of things in like a separate episode where we really delve deep on those nuances. Maybe now I've got in my notes a brief note on global variances, and that we're focusing on the Western constructs because I guess we understand them. But a crime's not a crime everywhere. Like the same thing is not a crime everywhere all over the world. And my question was maybe a note on someone like Snowden, who has immunity from laws. Some people can be chasing around the world trying to hide from other laws. So give me a bit of a lowdown from the high ground about the global the global difference and why we're not going to, like, I guess I don't know much about Sharia law, so I'm not going to do a podcast now talking about crime and include everything about another culture's views on it because I just don't know them. So maybe that,
No, same. I know that a lot of talk about Sharia law in Western media, like painting scary, terrifying boogeyman is going to all your freedoms, your children in particular. But it's mostly stuff about like property and finances. Yeah. And
that's a whole area.
But that's like not our area, and we're very Western centric. With like owned half the world, but we don't know much about it. But yeah, like I said earlier, generally there's a couple of things that do remain taboo across most society. Sexual offense. So there are sort of common things that, again, evolutionary psychology speak. Those things will help the survival of us as individuals and the species as a whole. So they have been selectively, bred for in terms of natural selection. They have naturally been selected because they've benefited the species in some way, where things like murder and say like robbery, arson, theft, things like that. They typically don't, because they destroy resources and deprive others of resources. Sort of like affect the ability to survive that way.
So there are different sort of like legal systems around the world, though, aren't there? Like, you know, for example, some countries like might cut off your hand for being a thief, but what we're saying is that the theft is still wrong around the world.
Yeah.
And the maybe like someone like Snowden who seeks immunity from certain laws, maybe there are some laws that you couldn't really maybe, I'm just going to cross the border and now that's okay because, you know, over here they don't worry about murders. Like we actually have an international policing system, don't we, where you can just go and say, this is the international IPCC. We're going to go and pluck you out of that country, and you know you've been naughty.
Yeah, there is, but those tend to be like more, because like what did Snowden go down for? It was like confidentiality, wasn't it? He leaked. He was a whistleblower.
Yeah. And he's on the run from the American government, so that he doesn't have to. Yeah. And certain countries won't. What's the word? Extradite. They won't send him back, so he can live there, and that's fine to them.
Yeah. Well, 150,000 years ago, as hunter-gatherers, treason wasn't a concept that we had. You know, it wasn't a thing. You couldn't have imagined somebody like Snowden, like escaping from one tribe to another because they told secrets from that tribe to a third tribe. It doesn't really sort of correlate. So some things become like crimes, and some behaviors become criminal because of like the increasing complexity of our modern society. There are still some constants, but yeah, a lot of crimes nowadays, especially things like consumption, like laws regarding alcohol sale, consumption, and cannabis substances in general, those things tend to be more modern social creations as well, because previously, again, those are things you just consumed the fruits and veg around you at the time for sustenance. So there are some things that we could evolutionarily select for, but other things just come about as a result of our living situation now, not being hunter-gatherer tribes, but instead being community.
I suppose, with an example like cannabis as well, is that as we focus on our Western constructs, things that come from elsewhere that aren't, like, one of the things about cannabis, maybe opium's another good example with the Afghanistan situation, is that, you know, there are some, I mean, it probably is illegal out there, but it just goes on more. Anyway, look, the point is that some things we've got a global system now, so some things come from other countries into our global system, and we have to suddenly decide whether we're going to regulate for it or not. But, you know, you could go across the border and people just don't consider it a crime. Oh, it's normal here, it just grows in the ground, it's just a weed. Whereas over here, all of a sudden you're shipping in drugs. So like, you have these differences around the world with some things, don't you? A crime is not a crime everywhere, was my little header there. So I wanted to then say, now we know what is and isn't wrong, yeah? We know how society creates norms and values. Like, we know what drives us to decide what's good and bad between us. We've got some ideas about that. So the next question is, why do people do wrong things? Simple as. Just so, if you could just give me a yes or no on that, and then we'll move on to the first one I wanted to ask about really was, I think someone mentioned it in chat earlier, was phenomenology. Is that phrenology? I don't know what I'm saying there. I've invented analogy, but the idea that someone's head shape or body shape might be the clue to whether they are in fact a naughty bad criminal. That was probably the first like the first idea that came out, was it?
One of the early ones, yeah, because to go back to when everything was like more dominated by religion, crime and criminals crime was sort of seen as the result of like a defective character in some way. You were spiritually impure, you were a sinner. If you did a crime, there was some fault within you personally. But as Darwin sort of comes along and goes, well, hang on, there's a natural law operating here, and we are part of that natural law just as much as any other animal. That idea starts to be, well, maybe those sorts of behaviors, there's a reason for them. There's an evolutionary like source to them. There's a biological thing that's causing it, and that really pushes field of criminology, as it were, in that direction. Because now all of a sudden you think, well, hang on a minute, I can look into things, I can check, I can say, I think people who have this marker of the nose, or this sort of like curve of the ears, or this sort of jutting out of the chin are going to be criminal. And I've gone and had a look at a bunch of criminals, check to see if there's a lot of people with this chin or this ear or this. And it sounds ridiculous, I know, but it is a thing that we had to go through to get to where we are now. So, you know, these people are doing science right at the birth of science.
So it does count as science, doesn't it? It's testing a theory, testing the idea. Didn't turn out to hold much water. But I suppose what's interesting about this is that our first ideas of who might be a criminal were physical, rather and manifestations of this like corruption within, seen outwardly. And like in today's day and age, we still have this idea in all forms of media. You know, the baddies are in some way maybe deformed, they have a bad eye or a hook, or you know, there's this idea that physical imperfection equates to villainy, and I guess that might also happen with this in-group out-group thing of, you know, seeing people that are different to you. That might, and we talk about skin tone and race problems with crime, and you know, it's no surprise, I guess, that white people think that the darker skinned people might be more like in some way villainous and scary. Like these ideas were tied in right from the start, weren't they? Even though we showed them to be basically invalid. Yeah.
Over the following few decades, that would be a thing that would come to pass. But yeah. There's always been that sort of idea that we can find in some way a marker for criminal behaviour, and it's still to this day. I feel like we should point out that those attitudes do still persist, like you said, that wrong uns are different in some physical way, whereas the reality is, you know, most offenders are just normal people. Like everybody else, they're just normal people, and there's not really like a look that identifies a robber or a murderer or a sex offender. They're normal people. That's the terrifying.
Yeah. I would say as well, I'm going to let a range of opinions just roll in the chat. I'm not going to pick everything out. And hello, everybody. I'm not going to pick out anything. You know, we're going to keep talking and doing the podcast, and at the end we might take some questions. But interesting to have a different opinions rolling through the chat. I'm absolutely fine with, you know, open ideas, as long as it doesn't go too far and I have to you know, regulate for YouTube purposes. You know the rules. That's all fine. And what I was going to say was that we still have this problem persist today, don't we? Not just that people think people might be wrong, and like you said, but also the actual police themselves have to watch out for not what do they call it, profiling.
Profile. Yeah.
Could you know, your turn. Talk. Profiling and the police, the problem.
That's a difficult one. That again, you've got to remember that police are also people just trying to do a job, just as anybody else. They're in this capitalist system, and they're subject to enforcement of stuff like your resources and your money and what laws you have to enforce. You know, if we tell you you're out on the street patrolling, then you're out on the street patrolling. If we tell you you're interviewing somebody today, you're. So, you know, the idea that the police just have sort of like a free reign to do as and what they want is sort of a bit unfair. They are dictated to by governments as well. Their local areas, local councils will be like, the crime rate's a bit too high in this area. Do well, you know, more police on the streets or more enforcement of this law, or this area is a particular hotspot, increase patrols around there. They also have to be like, well, we've not got the officers for it. So again, forces at play determine where the police do what. But yeah, profiling is an issue, and that tends to come about when the police are being made to do a job in a specific area. You know, because if you keep looking in the same area over and over again, you're going to find most of the people that live there. And if one of the areas that you're looking in over and over again is a majority ethnic community, most of the people you're going to be stopping and talking are going to be ethnic minority. So
that's a good point. It might not necessarily be that they're watching people go past and saying, all right, this one's black, let's pull this one over. It might be that they're in an area where the predominant race is, you know, black, and then they're pulling over a lot of young black kids, because that's the problem we've got at the moment, isn't it, in sort of crime stats maybe in urban areas, is it seems to be that the police, like if you're driving around being a normal person, and the only crime you committed was that you're black, the police might pull you over, like if your car was nice enough or something. Like there's this idea that the police choose people rather than and that's come from this idea of who they think is a criminal based on other ideas.
Yeah, but I do also have to point out that, it is a real issue. And these things are informed by the biases of not only the police, but the people telling them what to do. So if, your local council that's saying, hey, patrol this area more, is conservative or right-wing, right-leaning, then that's going to reflect their biases as well, because those are going to be reflecting the biases of a right-leaning population around the area that's going, well, hang on a minute, the right-wing news that we're reading tells us this crime is up high and, crime rates are escalating and we're terrified and we want you to do something about it. It's similar to the left wing. I'm not just saying that, exclusively right wing phenomenon. It happens more often. Left wing also have this. We think there's a certain bias. We have a bias towards certain crime. Just we tend to be less punitive. And I know this seems like a generalization, but it is broadly true. That's the thing. If you're right wing, you tend to be more punitive in your approach to social justice. To criminal justice, whereas left wing, all the arguments for reform and rehabilitation tend to be made by left writers and criminologists.
So going back to writers and criminologists, then we decided that the whole science of looking at someone's head shape or deciding if they were black isn't necessarily the best way to decide if someone's a criminal, and we've got, I guess, at this stage, other people forming other early ideas about norms and values. I've got the name Durkheim here.
Yeah.
You've got the name, you mentioned him earlier. I think that was a good time to bring him in. And
to bring him in, one of the founding philosophers, one of the founding fathers. Right. Okay. I have to point this out as well, because when I was doing my sociology course for getting back into university, we made a joke in class about pronouncing Durkheim because of the way the lecturer pronounced it. He wasn't Scout, but he at one point he said it in a Scouse accent and it was hilarious.
Durkheim.
So, yeah, Durkheim. With the
Durkheim. Durkheim.
Yeah. So now every time I say it, I think Durkheim, and I hear it in my head.
See, the thing is, it's spelled Drukheim. Yeah, but I think it's pronounced Derich. So, yeah. Anyway, this fella.
Yeah, Durkheim. He proposed the school of functionalism, that the idea that all your social institutions fit and work together. They exist in a codependent state, and you can't really have the one without the other. So you have things like your religious belief tend to give the populace their sort of sense of moral identity. They give them a sense of community and belonging as well. So they serve multiple functions, and that populace then goes on to work, and they send their kids to school where the ideas of the state and society are passed down. So all these systems, all these social institutions tend to live in a codependent state, and crime is therefore also an aspect of society that you need. You can't really have a society without crime, because crime is inherently a social act, because it is a transgression of social norms. So it's reflective of the norms of that society, because by saying this is the norm you have broken, you are reflecting that society, that social norm. So if you break the norm of robbing someone and depriving people of their property, that is seen as a statement of this society has this attitude towards the importance of individuals keeping their property. The severity of the crime, the severity of the punishment and the sentencing shows how much this society, how much importance and emphasis this society put on that belief. So it has a sort of back and forth, sort of interplay with the idea of a justice system. It also pushes it, like we've spoken to about the way that what we define a crime changes over time, and therefore so does the legal system's response to it. As societies change and as their values change, what becomes a crime and what is considered a crime is reflective of that society. Like, we don't consider sodomy a crime anymore. It's, without consent. We don't consider the consumption of some substances a crime. Drinking alcohol isn't a crime. So that is a reflection of our values saying we're okay with people engaged in certain sex.
So Durkheim was basically saying, forget the shape of your head, right? It's based on what other people think and decide around you. Like, things are happening, and we're going to say that's bad, that's a crime. We're defining these things for ourselves, and it's social ideas rather than Like there's like these two worlds, aren't there? There's the personal psychology of someone, the why they do things, and there's this kind of other world of everyone else is got a say on it, and the whole world. Sort of...
you can have like macro and micro sort of perspectives. You have the individual psychology of the early sort of the early days of criminology, let's say, with Lombroso, Cesare Lombroso, who's the one who sort of really spurned it. Was he
a DJ as well? Because that's quite a cool name.
It is a pretty cool name, isn't it? Yeah. He's the one who sort of really sparked the idea that you could find physical determinants of criminal behavior in people, because he noticed when he was a doctor and he was involved in like autopsies of condemned criminals, and one day he found like a dent in a skull of a recently condemned criminal, and he realized that there was a corresponding lump in the brain, and he was like, oh, you don't get that in everyone, but this guy's a criminal and he has it. Maybe that's and that's where the idea of a physical determinant and something being physically different with criminals comes from. But then you have the macro sort of like look at society and the way that societies work by Durkheim and Weber, who wrote about different religions in different countries around that. I think Weber came a bit later than Durkheim. Durkheim sort of just before Lombroso, but we're talking like 1850s to 1900 time. So yeah, that's sort of when these fields are sort of really establishing each other. But yeah.
Okay, so then
those are the time when the idea sort of like looks at society as a whole. Yeah, it takes a step back from the individual and works at macro level.
So I'm going to give you another shout out. I've got your channel posted up behind me here. It's like next to you. You've done quite a good video on crime, and I should have had it open in another window here somewhere. Criminology video essay, theories of crime causation, and that's one of the things that I'm using to jump about ideas with you here. So
no, see that one was before I had the ability to do thumbnails. So that's just like a screenshot of that's like one of the default ones from YouTube, and it's Wilson and Murray, and now a couple of people might think.
Well, if you ever decide to change it, then that will make what you've just said irrelevant. So,
I probably should have changed it. Yeah.
But in that you talk about this idea of anime, and then the Chicago school, and this really really interesting idea of industrial residential zones and how they overlap and where crime happens, and it's like these other examples of ideas about crime forming in a more academic way. So do you want to talk through some of these ideas quickly for us? Quickly, okay. Or slowly, or whatever pace you want.
Okay, well, Durkheim sort of like saw the idea that the values that are passed down through society are what it is reflective of its norms and its values. But he also realized that because these people writing around the time of the Industrial Revolution, so they would see populations shifting as people move from like your more sort of towns and feudal sort of villages to industrial centres like Manchester, Sheffield, London, all the big cities. And he realised that during these periods, people are sort of reorganising themselves and society is sort of re-establishing itself. And these are periods where the norms and values might be in flux. You might end up with a point where there's not really any sort of reflective value over something, and he calls these periods anomy, which are like literally without law. And he sees this as like not necessarily bad, but he recognizes that it can be harmful to society because it's a period where things are in flux and nothing is really stable, and the longer that thing perpetuates,
Can I just, yeah. So what we're saying is that there are times when, like, for these examples, there was a shift in population. Everyone got up and went to the big city to go and make something of themselves. I'm going to go and work in that factory, mama. I ain't picking corn no more. And then they're off to the big city, and like then there's this huge like sort of shift in, like, so we're all here at once, and maybe the laws don't apply. It's almost like, I guess, a Wild West feeling of like we're all out here on this pioneering moment, and okay, we've got rules and order, but that's for back in the villages, for and the village elder can tell you. But here, there's none of that. We're all out here, swimming in the sea together. So, it's sort of sink or swim, dog eat dog at times. And at these moments, Like what I find really interesting about that moment is that we're sort of saying that society has to sort of self-regulate. Like at times you might say, I don't want the police around, I don't want these laws, I don't want this like criminal system. We're going to talk about it at the end of this episode about, you know, things that me personally I'm not particularly happy with, like, and you know, certain aspects of things that we might want to change for the future and worry about, maybe, or not worry, you know, give you safe dreams. But at this point we're saying that there's these moments where population shift and it is a bit more anarchic, maybe.
Yeah, you can find a lot of that reflected in work at the time, where you have like your Victorian era magazines like Punch, which is where a lot of like our information about comes from, and they would sort of like write about the they would be writing about the fears and worries of the people who lived in this city, because a lot of the writings around that time do revolve around crime, and particularly garrotting was a big worry for Victorians, people sneaking up behind you, coming out. So they would have like pictures of people with huge metal, like, you know, like when you take your cat or your dog to the vet and they get the
cone of shame.
I am not kidding about this.
The cone of shame, yeah.
Oh, my love for books. This is Hooligan. You can see on the
right.
It's about this. It's about the media representing certain, I like what we call them, folk devils and moral panics. Or the idea of like, oh my god, there's this big like furore about garrottings in London, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah,
they sold a lot of neck braces.
Yeah. But yeah, at that point, things are still in upheaval, because once again, you also have a parliament and a legislative system that's slow to react to, oh my god, we've got all these new people in this place. How do we handle millions of people when previously we've been a village of a couple of 100,000? And how do we deal with this sudden expansion of factories taking up all this space and all these people moving stuff? How do we handle all this raw material coming in and things like that? So all these things have to change very, very quickly, and during this period things are slightly in flux. So that's your sort of moment of anomie, when things are not quite certain, so people don't really have like this attitude of this is right, this is wrong. Some people might be okay with this, other people might be against, but you know, at this moment its legality is questionable. So yeah, during the Industrial Revolution a lot of this sort of disruption happens, and that's where we get to the Chicago School and their idea of zones of transmission, because they sort of prophesized, that's the wrong word, they sort of proposed the idea that your population sort of clusters in various densities depending on how close it is to work, and you have like your central business districts where all your factories are and all your places of work, all your offices, and then outside of that is what's called the zone of transmission, because your workforce need to live close to the factories, and there's a lot of them, so they're all clustered in this outer zone of like mainly terraces.
You can picture it, can't you? This is how most of our cities in the UK are. You've got you still, even if it's not industrial factories, you've still got the city centre, the town centre, the main bit, and then the residential zones with the like you say, the smaller, more crammed together houses, you know, surrounding them. Maybe some of them are being more gentrified these days, but they still exist, don't they? You can still picture this as how we live now, sort of thing.
That's where I'm in a terrace. So yeah, they completely. I'm picturing London, I'm picturing Manchester, I'm picturing Sheffield, all these places.
Birmingham as well. Shout out Birmingham as well.
So,
and if anyone where you are in the world, if you want to put that in chat and shout out your own industrialised city centre, feel free. But we're not going to turn it into any gang war.
But like outside that, you then have like the richer people who could afford to move to like the nicer areas where it's a bit greener and a bit more space. Mm-hmm. And then the further out, the richer you tend to have to be to need to live there. But obviously with housing prices now.
But you were saying in these zones of transmission, that's where we discovered that crime was more prevalent, was it?
Well, yeah, they sort of proposed that because these are areas where no one's really settled down, because where you have a settled down community is where your norms and ideas about crime and acceptable behaviour tend to establish themselves very firmly. Because all your institutions are there, they're working, you're at school, you're hanging out with your mates, they're all passing on the norms and the values of your parents, their parents, of the church that you go to on Sundays and all that.
Right, so you've got a functioning society, it's established, and it serves to, just within its own social mechanism of norm, like you say, your peers like sort of don't have you going completely out of line. It's self, not governing or policing, but you know, you get the idea from where you, like most of us normal people get the idea to not go out and be criminals, I'm guessing, because most of us grow up in a sort of system, like you say, where society is functioning and you're making the choices to, you know, not be a criminal. In general, we'll talk about some of these other aspects later. In general, so so that's society. But where these transient areas are, and nowadays it might be areas where you get more immigration, because maybe you get a generation of immigrants who live somewhere, they like do well for themselves in some way, you know, work hard and move out into these other areas. Like you were saying, you get this social mobilisation, and then those houses can then be free for the next wave of immigration, or you know, it's about class structure in a way. These transient areas maybe these days.
Yeah, but those immigration is an interesting one, because immigration often will lead to second or third generation people struggling with the sort of like the values of the, you know,
they're bringing in another society's values. Yeah,
and the society that they're growing up in, because they're now growing up in the way that, you know, you're not just Indian, you're British Indian, for example. So you now have two social cultures at play. One of my favourite comedies ever, goodness gracious me. So I bloody love that. We're going for an English on a Friday night. Love it. And it's that sort of, it was actually used by our sociology teacher for one of the lectures, because it's a good example of that intersection of an immigrant community and an immigrant culture bringing in and then assimilating over time, so that it can embody both English and Indian sort of cultural value.
That's what being British is all about, isn't it? You know, politics aside, we've had all these years of empire and this and that, and you know, I didn't go out and do any bad things. I didn't go out and do any good things. I wasn't there. I wasn't born. So I'm not going to say I'm British, therefore this X, Y, Z. But what I perceive, like I'm telling the world here, if anyone's, you know, watching this, what I perceive myself as a modern person in Britain is that what it means is everyone from anywhere can be involved. And like we take, you know, it doesn't matter where you're from, all over the world. You know, Britain's been around there. We've been over that way, and you know, you can come here. It's all, you know, for me, it's all open arms in theory, like, you know, and that's what's led to a really rich and diverse society that's allowed us to, you know, have such wonderful different ideas coming from all these different places, and led to so many success stories. So that's my feeling on being British, is that. You know, we do see a lot of, I would say, like you said, like third generation, second generation, even first generation immigration, and it's always been that way, being British. Like I felt like, you know, we've had Angles, Saxons, Vikings, Nords, Romans, the original Celts. They've ended up in, they've ended up in Scotland and Ireland because they had to fucking get away from everybody else who was coming in. So it's always been that way, and it's been a.
And you've got like the Vikings coming in from the north.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, there's all sorts of different cultures here, and it's all good in the hood for my feel on that. So interesting that these early, going back to what you're saying, is that these early academic ideas were focused on like these social factors. Again, like they were sort of saying that there's these social ideas of what is maybe a cause of crime, or why people do the wrong things, and this could lead, like, we're going to lead on to like the other ideas of, like, I'm going to ask you some questions about crime causation in a bit, but this led on to this idea about national ideas clashing with realities and how to prosper in America.
Yeah, we might skim over this a bit because we're not American, but typically, you know, we sort of understand what the American dream is.
Yeah, well, I thought this was quite a poignant part, a poignant part of your video, and the reflection on The Wire and the way they reflect, you know, these conversations about crime. Up to this point, what we've said is that we know inherently what's right and wrong. Right, and we've got a society that is good at sort of saying, hang on, you shouldn't be doing that, pull your finger out, you know, buck up your ideas, son, stop kicking that ball against that window or something, you know. Like in general, you know, we've got this, and then we've got academics who are looking at it and saying, okay, you've got these like social reasons why these things might happen, and then all of a sudden there's actually a more solid reality. It's not just The Wire. It went back to maybe Prohibition before that, and we'll talk about these ideas now. But you've got this idea that, no, hang on, society not right. I've got a different idea about this. I'm going to do something different, and it's going to equate to the success that you should, strive for, but in a different way entirely. So the topic that I've written is national ideas clashing with realities, how to prosper in America. But I think it includes society, how to prosper in society up against the law, maybe, or outside. Go.
Yeah, well, I considered it America because during like that video essay, I was specifically looking from the Chicago school to Merton's theories of economic strain. Which
but you don't have to just make a little. We can dig deep on this. We don't have to skim over it if you want. We can go deep if you want. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, but I was like and explicitly because of the whole point of the American dream, because we don't have a British dream, do we? There's no British dream for us. There's no like idea that we can make it if and all you need is like the idea, or you need to work hard or anything like that. We're still a very class sort of like stratified society, where like moving between social mobility between the classes is difficult. But in America, a lot of importance is put on the idea of the American dream, and anyone can do it. Anyone can be president. Anyone can be rich. That sort of thing.
And
very important.
Really good point there. You've literally seen that recently, haven't we? With Donald Trump. Obama. With Barack Obama. Like anyone can be president. But it swings
Donald
both
Trump
ways.
is also a very good example of
it
the
swings
fact
both
that
ways,
anyone can be president.
But
the idea is that making money, making wealth, obtaining resources is a very it's a very American thing, whereas we're just trying to get by. But that's a very crucial part of the American dream, and the reality is most Americans don't get to achieve the American dream. Their lived experiences, their reality clashes against that.
The American dream just specifically is that you go there, you earn money, you succeed, sort of thing.
Basically, yeah.
Through endeavor equals success.
Yeah. This is America's Protestant founding. Was it Weber who wrote the Protestant? No, it wasn't Weber, was it? It was Durkheim who wrote the Protestant ethic. My sociology teacher's going to kill me.
I was never able to remember. This is why I couldn't pass the exams. Is because I can remember the general stuff we're talking about, but if you ask me who said it and when, and on which page of the book, I'm like, no, I don't really like.
It was Weber.
It was Weber. There you go.
Yeah. So he looked at like just the differences in how capitalism was able to establish itself in countries that had like a Protestant or at least some form of Christianity that wasn't Catholic, because the idea was that wealth was seen differently in Protestant and Protestant offshoot countries than it was Catholic countries, and that's why capitalism sort of like established itself and took hold there. So you have this like unique approach to the idea of getting rich and what rich is as a reflection of society. If you're rich, you've made it, you're good, you're in the upper crust of society. Whereas for us, being in the upper crust is something that you achieve by birthright, because we've gone through the process of having a kingdom and a law.
It's old money.
It's old money for us,
and that's why you had this issue with like the concept of a chav, like people actually doing that American dream thing, earning money and spending it however they wanted, but without this maybe upper class sensibilities, so they choose these more like garish things to spend it on. And then you also had people who are now in politics who are of this nouveau riche, like this new money, and there is a clash even amongst the high, that's why we had like some of the politic problems and we have some of the political problems we've got at the moment with the old guard and the old money conservatives and the people who are getting rich in new and inventive ways. Talking of new inventive ways and crime, like carry on and explain how this leads to.
So when that experience that you have of a reality of life in America and the American dream clash, you experience something called economic strain, and one of the ways that you deal with that is to innovate. It's basically, you can withdraw. You can be like, well, then fuck it. I'm just not going to play the American dream at all. You can work harder. You could try other things like within legitimate means, or you can innovate outside of the law. And it may be something that is explicitly legal at the time, or it may be something that's, not been made illegal yet, not been criminalized yet. Like for us, a good example was Spice a couple of years ago, the synthetic cannabinoid.
Spice,
where it was sold in like head shop things openly.
Yeah, I don't know what you call that in America, but it would be like it's just fake cannabis.
It's a synthetic cannabis basically, and for a brief while it was legal, and then now.
Yeah.
So, but you were able to innovate at the time because it wasn't explicitly illegal. Rather than it being legal to do it, it's the fact that it wasn't illegal that allowed people to make money selling it.
So you're finding the sort of cracks in the system, or the you know, where the line is grey and, you know, not so easily penciled in, and you're finding ways to make money that maybe the normal people, when I say normal, I mean like norms and values of society, like the regular folk, you're not finding success along these regular mechanisms, either socially or economically, whatever it is, politically. You're not able to live that American dream and get that fast car and do these nice things. So you're looking elsewhere, being innovative was the word you said. And it's like, we're talking about, you know, coming up with new ideas, aren't we? We're talking like, you know, like maybe in a way I kind of feel like in a way I want to describe American gangs and, you know, and crime, but in another way I also want to describe Del Boy and Rodney and, like, you know, this sort of market trader, wheeler dealer. Like there's almost two concepts of this in my mind, like a more sinister version and a more acceptable version. Like,
yeah, that's the thing. This shouldn't be sort of like taken as an indictment of the legality of these things, or the sort of like the moral goodness, the moral right or wrongness of these things. They are just things that happen, you know, and they're not new things either. Think about like how you sort of like Robin Hood figures throughout history have been romanticized. People who have like innovated that way by fucking stealing, you know. But still,
so you can.
The idea of Robin Hood is the redistribution afterwards.
So importantly as well, when you're saying innovation, that can include things that it's like saying, I don't care what you say is a crime and what's not. I've got my own code and I'm going to go with this because your system's not allowing me to succeed. But, you know, if I don't get caught, as Rudy and the dog said in chat earlier, if I don't get caught, then I'm not a criminal yet. Like, I'm living outside the law in a way. Like, I'm just doing it. Like that would be what I would think of with The Wire, with the drug crime and the gangs. Is like, obviously it is illegal, but they're going to do it because there's a niche here that they're going to exploit.
And it's not just a niche here that they're going to exploit. It's also something that the individuals are going to be feeling in terms of status frustration, because you are not that high on the totem pole. But in a gang, you can go higher. You know, you can go from somebody like running the corner to somebody shifting between state lines to one of the big boys. You know, you could be like one of the heads, one of the gangsters. You could be.
It's got its own structure and everything.
Oh, its own structure,
like a business.
Yeah, like any business. Yeah, but also with that comes status and respect amongst your peers. If you are all in a gang and you're higher than the others, they respect you. So you get it that way. It's not just because you're rich and people respect you for being rich. It's a different way of getting that sort of status satisfaction of, I've made it this way, I've made it that way. But yeah, we've romanticized and idealized these figures and these people throughout history. We've had them be serious and we've had them comic because they're I don't want to say like it's stereotypes, but they are sort of cultural touchstones, as it were. The idea that people rebelling against the system and succeeding is attractive when you are struggling within that system. I
suppose there's two other aspects to it. Both of these things that I just mentioned, they're both like Del Boy and the gang selling drugs. They're both enterprising. They're both like engaging with capitalism. They're product salesmen essentially, but black market products. But there is another aspect of crime that we don't tend to romanticize or like people who go out stabbing, or I shouldn't use the really horrible words in the podcast because it might fuck it up on the algorithm, but you know, all the horrible ones, like the horrible things, like they're not like, oh, you know, Del Boy do a sitcom, or you know, The Wire be the coolest pedo. Like, it's not about that. Like, no one's rocking like that look. Like, do you know what I mean? So there are some crimes that are apparent and outside the law that we don't romanticize, but it's interesting that when it comes to in some way the end goal, like, you know, you become rich, you become like what happened in The Wire was Stringer Bell was trying to reassimilate himself back in at the top level. He was trying to, like, you know, pay his way out of the crime and become a normalized citizen again, like with legitimate concerns. So it seems like if you can make it anyway, good on you, sort of thing. I'm not saying like, you know, drug gangs shooting each other, good on you. I'm saying that like this general attitude from the media that we were talking about, like you can sort of, and you're saying romanticize and these things, you can do that with certain aspects of crime as long as it fits to that other social value of be commercially successful. If does that make sense?
Yeah, because that's the whole goal of the American dream. That's why this bit of the video was a very American-centric thing, because a lot of like the work of it comes from Americans looking at America in the 1950s, like between the 20s and the 50s, except in, obviously during the war, but during the bits where the American economy was doing very, very well, and the American manufacturing was also doing very, very well. It crashed during the 20s, but that forces populations to move well. When you financial and economic crisis, people move elsewhere to look for jobs and look for work. So those also sort of prompt social movements. Not social movements in the we're protesting for change, but social movements as in like the population all fucking off from one town and going and living in another. That's what.
So like, in terms of crime as well, we're able to say, I guess, like we're talking about how society is. It's not like right. It's not like there's a new technology and suddenly people start doing crimes with it. It's that there are people in society who are not succeeding because society's not set up to allow them to succeed. So instead they find novel, different ways to succeed, some of which are criminal. And if they fit our other social norms and values of, enterprise, sales, like in some ways we either, I'm not saying we allow it, because a lot of people hate drug dealers and think like drug dealers equal bad, or like, a lot of people, there are negatives to some of these occupations, but I even just mentioned it then, like an occupation, and you've had Breaking Bad on the telly and stuff like that. So there are these Breaking Bad wouldn't have worked if Heisenberg was also a pedo. So like we've got this aspect of crimes that we say are socially, as long as you're on the sort of a certain side of the right blurred line, it's like a success story within a certain parameter, and so we know why. I guess what I'm boiling it down to is, why do people do these things? It's because I can be a social success where I wasn't allowed to get that good job, I wasn't allowed to go and go to that university, so instead I sold these drugs and I got the fucking car and the hat and I'm happy, and like, fuck you.
Yeah, that's basically the whole point of Talcott Parsons' theory. The idea that you've made it one way or the other. It doesn't matter. Whether the fact that it's illegal or not yet been criminalised is sort of like the driving force of it. But other things as well, like social upheaval at the time. Obviously, if there isn't a job anywhere, but there's always a market for drugs, so you can make money shipping heroin. Or if you've not got a great home life, you don't have, great relationships with parents and constant fighting, but you're a member of a gang, so you get that stability and that sensation of people looking out for you that way.
Do you know, it occurs to me as
Innovation in any way.
It occurs to me as well that we're talking about shit, it occurred to me and then I just like completely got out of my head then. Yeah, sorry.
Walk it back, mate, walk it back. Talking about Talcott Parsons, America in the 50s. About The Wire.
Oh yeah, I was talking about the things that are bad. That are, okay, so, yeah, okay. It occurs to me that within crime, there's a society, and within that society, like sub-society, within that, there's another set of laws. Like they've got their own laws. Like you can't just go and murder people just willy-nilly. Like you have to do it within a gang. Like one for one this, like I've got orders, this and that. Like if you're just going to go and be a fucking a wonderful drug dealer, like benevolent to the community, but also a pedo, no thanks, we don't want that. Like like they like self-police within the crime community. So and we see that with the craze as well. Like there's this idea that you can romanticize criminals as long as they themselves have like an honor code within them, and like there's like that's what it took. Boiling it down to is people decide to become criminal because they can also still be noble in some way.
Yeah, but now that you've mentioned the craze, I have to point out that last podcast we did, I was struggling to remember the name Tom Hardy, and my brothers watched it and he was screaming at that point. You'd like that film, so yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, we have always like romanticized that sort of thing. It's not a new thing, but it is also its own function. Again, functionalism and Durkheim, it's serving a function. It's replacing the institutions that would have been legitimate but have failed with an institution that might not be legitimate but is successful at instilling your norms, your values. It gives you a sense of security, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, and it gives you a structure. It gives you a system, and that you can move it up in. You can move up through this social system if you work, or if you show that you can keep your mouth shut, or you show that you're a good soldier, or if you can prove yourself useful to this gang, this community that you are now part of,
and there
you
are
will
things
be rewarded.
there are things they won't accept that you're not to do that might actually be socially productive in some way. There's a possibility of I'm not saying in any particular crime gang, but there's a possibility of that they could do socially constructive things, maintain a stability, police an area. Do you know what I mean?
Well, look at what they did during lockdowns in I think it was Mexico. They did, when everything was locked down, it was often like local gangs of drug dealers that were delivering food and like toilet rolls and things to people in poorer areas because the government was failing. So it's not that difficult to see why these sorts of figures get romanticized by the communities around them.
And so this is how people become criminals: is they decide to take up a career in something that seems romanticized. So the next question I've got on the list, and you are right, this is going to be a long one today. We're at 1 hour and 20. We're rolling nicely. Is prohibition, the old style alcohol. This is a good example of this, isn't it? Is in America, for a while, they decided that alcohol was like criminal now. We're not having that. It's in the same bucket as drugs. Or maybe they didn't have the drug laws. Maybe I'm being silly there. But alcohol banned. And so that created like a whole wave of crime, I'll put in inverted commas, because people wanted to drink alcohol. I don't drink it myself, but people wanted to back then. And you had these gangsters that rose as figures that we still have in films. So talk to me about the creation and capture of criminals at that time and what happened with prohibition.
Well, I'm not fully up on why it started. I believe there was
whatever aspects of it are interesting to you as a psychologist, I guess.
Yeah, I believe there was an incredibly vocal temperance movement at the time that made it a bit of an issue, which is sort of like reflective of what we said earlier about how we go through our process of you elect the people that you want to enforce the laws that you feel most align with yours, and you tell them, hey, I think you should change this law, and they take it to Parliament. I believe it was that. I believe it was an incredibly vocal group of people. But then, the early days, I'm not so sure. I think a lot of that time, the policing was not great, because we're coming around 1920, so we're not that far off Jack the Ripper, H.H. Holmes, Dr. Crippen sort of era stuff. So you've probably got like stuff like fingerprints are a new thing at that. But most of the time, there's no real sort of like ballistic evidence, so you're mostly relying on witness testimonies of drive-bys, and I'm not entirely sure how you would go about capturing them. I believe what ultimately did them in was it illegal to drink again. Then
there was that, and also tax, wasn't it? They got Al Capone on tax evasion, and it's interesting that we're touching on here. We don't have to stay with a prohibition. We've mentioned it that they did it in America.
The idea is that it's a value that changes and then changes back after. And the idea that also once you've made this thing illegal, people are innovating within it to make money, because obviously they made millions.
I guess the 2 points I wanted to state here was there were people that used to drink, and then suddenly they were criminals if they were drinking. And they wouldn't have changed their behaviour. It's society just decided overnight that now you're a criminal, and some of them decided to continue being criminals and drinking, and others decided, no, I'm not going to drink anymore because society says it's illegal. They were probably in the minority. Majority of people still wanted to drink, so they just went to, instead of having the pub with the sign outside, they took the sign down. And then when the police came round, they all hid. You've seen it in the movies, but like you were saying, there wasn't much of a mechanism for the police to deal with Al Capone. Is like they had gangs of people with cars and things ferrying alcohol around, and there was still an existing network, and the police couldn't really police it. It was too big. So people got their alcohol and were drinking it.
Because like you said, this institution previously existed. Al Capone and gangs were there already. They weren't suddenly created by prohibition. They were there already. It's just that prohibition suddenly opens up this whole new market for them, and it's very lucrative because everybody was drinking up until yesterday when it was still legal. So it's now very easy for them to go, right, well, this market that we've got for shifting drugs, we can do it here. We can do it here as well with alcohol. So let's do that. And the police are completely unprepared for They don't have like the capability to take it on. They don't have, like the forensic evidence or the forensic science that we have nowadays to sort of keep up with it and keep up with the gangs. And
that then starts off. I'll move us on from that because we might light on it a little bit later when we talk about cannabis in the modern terms. But that then moves us on to this, the way a policing structure and style evolved over time. So there's like an arms race, not a literal guns race, but an arms race between police and criminal now, isn't there? Like so what we decided, we've still got some other ideas about why people become criminals, but from this line of thought, right, we've got that people decide that they need to earn money, the American dream or this business. They decide they're going to operate within their own honor code, but it's outside of the realms of society. The laws of society change anyway, and so people become criminals. There's a romanticism about it for some people. Maybe it's a societal in their area thing. It's the organisation, the business they can get into the easiest that's going to be most successful. And through this, we've decided that the police have then had to basically take down these people. The crime, the justice system, the deciding what is a crime, what isn't, has to keep up because we've got more and more innovative people being criminals. So that sparks what we would call like an arms race between criminal and police. And I was going to say, if you want to briefly talk about this, you can, but we could probably do that like a whole episode on that. Like,
yeah,
policing.
It feels like you need to mention it here because it's sort of touching what we're talking about.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's a whole other episode because you could go into quite a lot of like forensic detail about how different technologies evolved over time.
Yeah, and we want to do the police as its own episode, don't we? So so then other theories of crime causation then, like so that's like a whole narrative that I created there about crime. And it's easy in the modern world to talk about different narratives. I mean, I'd like to, as Rudy, don't worry about chatting in chat if you want. It's absolutely fine. I think it's important for us to note as well. All these things I've talked about recently. The most high-profile criminal we had in our country was Boris Johnson. So that's a fact. I'm not. That's a fact
by definition.
Yeah. So this is we're also talking about these other aspects of crime that we need to get onto in other ways. So we've got other answers as well, haven't we? Psychological and social. We've been talking a lot about sociological answers, and we've also got some more sociological answers. Like we've got one more before we can maybe touch on some psychological. I don't know. Maybe I've got them in different orders. What would you like to go? Like maybe Cohen, or do you want to go into somewhere more psychological?
Well, I didn't spend too much time on Cohen, but you'd be like the left realist Stanley Cohen.
Yeah,
great. Not left realist. I'm thinking of Stuart Hall. But yeah, Stanley Cohen, Folk Devils, Moral Panics. Should have a brief word about him.
Because he might fit in somewhere. It's hard to decide exactly who to put where. But Stanley Cohen certainly had another different idea about. Yeah, you've got the actual book. I love it.
The actual book.
I love it. I had to read it in. Like I was a lot younger. It was an A level, but like he's got ideas about how society just creates a criminal as well, hasn't he? Like so, we've got that one idea that you can become a career criminal through economic factors. But as we saw with Boris Johnson, like he didn't need to do that. None of that was applicable. Maybe this won't be applicable to Boris himself, but like we've got other kinds of criminal and other kinds of behaviours, haven't we? And Cohen had some ideas about society and social factors.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of what goes on in Hooligan as well, the other book that I mentioned earlier, because that's really a look at how the upper class demonizes the lower class, and a lot of it is developed from Folk Devils and Moral Panics because this isn't a new thing. The like I mentioned earlier, the Victorian magazines like Punch sort of talking about everybody being paranoid about garroting. Those are things that are like reflective of what's going on in these sudden masses of population and what the higher orders can do about it, because this is like an issue where they now see it as it's a threat to social stability, it's a threat to society. They're like out of control, they're rampaging, they're assaulting and mugging and knife crime and all that stuff, and really all it reflects is the fears of these old guards for newer things that are happening. The issue with Folk Devils and Moral Panics wasn't that, crime is spiraling out of control and all that. It was the fact that these two youth gangs called the Mods and the Rockers got into it at Brighton Beach one day. And it caused a big fight. There was a very big fight between them. I believe it went on for a few days. Actually, I don't really recall, but I'm sure they came back the next day. Carry on. I might be wrong about that, but either way, it was a big thing at the time because nobody could really deal with the idea that these two groups of youth existed. This is an era where you've gone from, it's post-war, so you're talking like 1950s. Society has changed in the last 50 years from a Victorian era. You go to the workhouses, and childhood is not really a thing. Once you're old enough to work, you are put to work, and now you've got this sudden social class of people who are not children but not adults either. So society doesn't know what to do about these teenagers, and now all of a sudden the two gangs of them are fighting on a beach, and the upper classes shit themselves. They don't know what's going on, and really what this is these two groups of people are showing their disaffection from society in two different ways. The mods and the rockers, they styled differently, they dressed differently, they had different sort of ideas of what their group and their identity as a mod or a rocker meant to them, but they're still both sort of going against the idea that you're a child and then you go to work, because society is rebuilding itself after the war, and so along with that rebuilding physically is a social and a cultural rebuilding as well, because suddenly we're like, well, hang on, maybe we don't need to put kids to work straight away, and though it would come later, the idea of stuff like they're moving away from corporal punishment for children. We don't beat our kids anymore, we don't cane them in school anymore, because those things are sort of legislated out later as part of this social and cultural rebuilding of society. And part of that becomes, what do we do about youth gangs? What do we do about things that are common in the lower classes? So because these are all people feeling the frustration of, I'm poor, got nothing to do, but my membership of a gang is giving me some sort of identity.
We're saying there's these young people, as you say, they haven't migrated into the upper echelons, have got a job, behaving like adults. Maybe some of them even don't want to do that, and they form these other counterculture groups. At the moment, they're not criminals.
No, and it's hard to sort of criminalize a social group. Criminalize behavior, sure. Criminalizing a social group is very different, so it's not really a thing that's done, but you can sort of apply the social pressure of getting people to tut at them and to dissuade your kids from joining them, and sort of dump it out that way. But it's sort of similar to when do you remember when Dave Cameron sort of said hug a hoodie a while ago? It's that sort of thing. It's the idea of looking patronizingly down upon the lower classes because you don't fully understand why their socio-economic situation has pushed them this way, because you've got no comprehension of being in that social economic situation in the first place.
And so at some point these groups are used to create a fear of criminality.
Yeah much like with the Victorian era stuff. There's the same basic principles are at play of, we're scared of this and we're going to demonize it, and it happened all the way through the 60s with marijuana, and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and I'm thinking of acid house and ecstasy during the early 90s, even during the early 2000s, when people were oh, kids are on their phones so much that it's going to give them brain cancer because they're holding microwaves right to their head for hours and hours.
So throughout this, I suppose drugs, maybe like you mentioned briefly though, but maybe there is a way, isn't there? Like you said, you can't criminalize a group, but they do criminalize the mods and the rockers. There was a lot of policing of them. They did fight with each other, I suppose, so there was that aspect of it. But there was a lot of policing of them, on top of that, to sort of clamp down on these groups. And so we were able to turn them into criminals by saying the things you're doing, because you're younger people, maybe, certain recreational drugs or, behaviours are now going to be more criminal. I remember earlier in the whole episode, you said that, the police are sort of an arm of the society, and they're doing what the society wants. And as long as we're scared of these people, we're going to tell the police to go and sort of step on them, sort of thing. So I think we could say that before you could have people that decided to become criminals. These people didn't decide to become criminals, did they? They just are criminals because society decides they are. It's like another way aspect around of it.
Yeah, it sort of ties into I can't remember. It's called labeling theory. The idea that, you know, if you keep calling me a criminal, I'm going to act like a criminal. You know?
Right, self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing. Now,
yeah. But, you know, like, because the label has been imposed on you rather than like self-fulfilling prophecy is ideally one that you work against, but your machinations of working against it cause it to come true. But labeling is like, I have given you this label, and now you're going to act like. If I call you a gangster, you're going to act like a gangster because you're like, well, you're calling me. Fuck it, then I'm going to. So it's the idea of we've criminalized these social groups. We're sort of like policing them, even though they're doing nothing wrong other than like hanging around. You know, that makes them feel like criminals. So they're going to be more and more likely to act like criminals. So if you keep policing like a gang of youth street, eventually you're going to give it one of them reason to kick off with you, or eventually you're going to find something that you can think, right, that's a crime, that's breaking, can have you in. So you're going to make criminals out of them, and it's an important theory in both left and right wing criminological theories, because like left wing realists sort of show that, you know, it's antithetic, it's a bad idea because you're just creating criminals, and really right wing people are, well, look, we are already right about it because we've seen the evidence previously of this sort of behavior leading to criminal activity. So, you know, we're calling them gangsters because they're gangsters. So both sort of like perspectives use it as a key part of theory. But yeah,
should I leave Cohen out now until we come back to modern media prejudices and things like that, or does he have more to say about how we create a criminal?
I think we should sort of move on, because modern nowadays is very, very different from like Cohen's. Right.
So we've looked at social answers up to now. Then are there? I'm struggling to just read all of my notes to decide if there are other socials. Maybe we want to move on to some psychological ideas. Like maybe we want to ask the question: are people just born bad, or is it that crime breeds crime? Like, you know, maybe you're born into a bad area, you're one of these bad people. Like, do you want to talk about Freud and Piaget? Or should I ask you questions about it? Should I ask you that directly? You know, can you be born bad? Have you got any evidence to support it?
Yes. Yes and no. Yes and no. There's a book called Anatomy of Violence by the neuroscientist Adrian Raine, and he basically in like that much detail, and I mean like the thickness of the book, right? He goes over so much evidence that suggests that there are biological markers that predispose people to criminal behavior, and these are things that are set in place well before you're born. So if you're in the womb developing nicely and your mum's a drinker, that's going to have an effect. Your mum's a smoker, it's going to have an effect. She has a bit of a trip, it's going to have an effect. So there are sort of like so many influences. If she lives in an area with high pollution, that might have an effect. So those are things that are like biologically within you that give you the predisposition to criminal behavior. But then you're born, and where you're born into, the society and the sort of like the individual economic circumstance that you find yourself born in, nature and nurture, that's where nurture kicks in. Because you could be predisposed to criminal behavior but be brought up in a very safe environment where your exposure to criminal activity is minimal. So you're not going to grow up into a criminal unless, you know, your circumstances push you that way. Whereas otherwise, you might not necessarily have a predisposition to criminal behavior, but if you're born into a place where criminal behavior is more common, you're more likely to be in it because social pressures will push you into it, or your economic pressures push you. Getting the shit beaten out of you at school might push you into fighting back and therefore be more violent. So those are things, you know, the lesson you've learned there has been violence solves my problem. It's a difficult thing because you can be born bad, but that's not necessarily an indicator that you're going to be bad.
It's interesting the way we talk about like the negative end of society, or negative end, like, you know, the negative end in terms of poverty and economics, in that we should all like hope for more and, you know, feel more comfortable with more. Do you know what I mean? The end that's struggling. But actually, crime, like, I'm thinking of private school people and, you know, people who are given every wonderful economic advantage, and again, like, even go as far as being prime minister and commit crimes. Like, there are still. I remember I went to a grammar school, so it wasn't about who was financially well off. It was, it wasn't a paid school, but there were some people who were more and some people who were less financially well off. And one of the naughtiest chuffers in my class, was actually quite economically well off, and has a nice car and things like that. So I don't know if it's necessarily like whether you can be born criminal or whether you have criminal intent in you. Like economics and all that, obviously we can look at studies and say, look, there's these factors stand out, but it's strange as well to me that I know people who by those parameters would not be criminals but yet are, if that makes sense. Like,
because like you said, if like the naughtiest chuffer in school was somebody fairly well off, you sort of question, well, why do you do that then? And it's like maybe he's rebelling in his own way against his situation, his social situation that he's in. Maybe things aren't happy at home, or maybe he's like doesn't have many friends outside of school, so he wants to be the big one that people talk about in school. Every school has sort of like a couple of notorious kids, their names sort of like, oh man, fuck, coming after you now, that sort of thing. A name spoken across the school, but again, those are sort of like nature and nurture things again, where it's not just like your potential for it, it's your situation. And I'm thinking of Bowlby now, because I'm thinking sort of psychology as we're shifting from economic and sort of like macro influences to the more micro stuff. I'm thinking of Bowlby in the 44 feet study, and he studied children who were orphans, I believe, or they may have been in orphanages, and he found out that like one of the defining features of these children when they went on to commit crime in later life was that they had very disrupted relationships with their mothers, and I believe he called it maternal depression. It's been a while since. His is one of the sort of like foundational studies in forensic psychology and sort of psychology as a whole, because it's a very developed study as well. He followed them over a period of years.
What's his name again? Sorry,
John Bowlby.
Okay.
Bowlby. And it's one of like the first to sort of indicate that the negative experiences in childhood can affect your behavior as an adult, or can at least sort of like establish your precedent for your potential, your potential for.
I suppose there's two really important points there. Is that you can have those negative events regardless of economic affluence. If you've got a lot of money and live in a lovely big house and your parents got loads of money, you can still have a shit childhood. Like that can still happen, right? But I suppose it's more statistically likely that if you're on the poverty end of the spectrum and things are difficult and struggling, and in a neighborhood where things are more criminal based and things are happening like that, then it's going to happen a lot more that you're going to have a shit childhood, like statistically, maybe.
So put in blunt, cold statistics, the sort of like closer proximity you are to, say, gang violence or like criminal activity on the street, robbers, mugging.
Or even just that in poverty situations, you've got more broken homes, you've got more drug use, you've got, just statistically, I'm saying, like, so those sort of other factors, the turbulence, the rolling thunder of a turbulent childhood, that will come out more in these situations than it will in a more maybe suburban, safer sounding, more 2.4 children stability sort of thing. So
your periods of anomie, again, they're you sort of like periods of social anomie where your norms and values that ostensibly your rich parents should have instilled in you sort of in flux because you're experiencing a sort of a disruption to them somehow. Maybe you go to a school where everybody bullies you for being the posh kid, and you're like, well, that's not my economic situation is not helping me now. So the norms and values that I have are flux, and you might start lashing out then as you try to sort of like re-establish a sense of identity or a sense of value then you might end up falling in with the wrong crowd who take advantage.
Do you think? Maybe. Do you think that we're only just starting to touch on psychological aspects here, but already I'm thinking that the sort of crimes that go with social deprivation and social mobility, working outside the law, innovation, that framework we set out earlier, those crimes seem to be within a certain framework, to include gaining of money. Probably stealing is a bad thing, but depending on who you steal from, we can talk about in a bit. The morality of murder might even come into that. But like, there's a sort of honour code, like we said. You're not just generally out being a bad chuffer, but the really bad crimes, like anyone can just, these other psychological factors that we're starting to bring in it can come from any walk of life, and now we're starting to maybe I don't know, not in actual police terminology, but in my mind I'm trying to put two buckets here now, almost like crimes that are necessitated through the economics of being a career criminal, and crimes that come from being a really bad chuffer and like, oh whoa, what are you doing there, you naughty, like like murder and these other things, and it seems that the psychology aspect has to come into this, because you can't just statistically say poor people are murderers.
Yeah, no. I mean, anybody has the capacity to throw a punch, So many crimes are sort of like ignorers of social status and economic stability, because you've also got crimes of passion as well. You might be rich and well off, but if you come back home one day early from work and you find your wife in bed with another person, and in your rage, you smash them over the head or you shoot them. That's
with your controller. Just thinking of Dark Side Phil there.
Yeah. You smash your controller in rage and then you demand tips. So yeah,
she charges by the hour,
in those circumstances, your economic status isn't liable to play much of an influence. So there are sort of like some crimes that are just across the board rather than exclusive to economic or social strata. But yeah, typically.
But there are some crimes. The way what you just I wanted to define this as well. Like what you just said there is like there's some crimes of passion. Like so, there are some crimes where you just feel so angry at the situation, you do whatever is most, aggressive or whatever at the moment. And I can understand that can turn anyone into a criminal. Then we're saying, like you said, any person can come up against a situation where they think I'm not tolerating this, or this is too much for me in some way, or even maybe they're doing the wrong thing by reacting with violence. We've got maybe violence on the list, but anyone then can be a criminal. It's not like a deep psychological problem that you had when you were young. It's something happened and now you're a criminal, right?
Yeah, but those are sort of like more situational than anything else. It's not everybody that's going to experience coming home, finding their partner for granted, having easy access to a firearm. So your situational things are sort of governed by they'll be governed by your response. It'll be your personally developed personality and how you react to times of stress, how you are capable of rationalizing certain behaviors or certain responses, stuff like how your nervous system has developed, so whether you're likely to kick into fight or flight. So yeah,
okay,
those are sort of unique things that aren't really economic.
I wasn't cutting you off with something else there, was I?
No.
Okay, so then let's talk about Freud, Piaget, the doll punching experiment,
Pandora, the Bobo doll,
and we'll move on to Eisenach, I don't know his name properly, and biological
Ising,
and biological conditioning, because that's what we're talking about now a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah. Freud didn't write much about criminology. His sort of like
he was saying that if something bad happens in childhood, you could be a bad chuffer.
Yeah.
Right.
Depending on like how your id, the sort of like the primal needs that you feel, your wants and desires, those things, how well you contain them and control them, and how strong they are.
Yeah.
That might lead to criminal behaviour. But
so
his clientele were all rich, so
Right, and so, but Piaget wanted to test this, didn't they? Like, if you're a kid and things are happening around you, do you become a bad chuffer? So, was that the doll experiment?
No, the dolls came later with Pandora. Piaget was a developmental psychologist.
Right, well, forget him again. Fuck him off. stick him in the bin. Tell me about these fucking dolls and punching them.
Okay, so the Bobo doll experiment involved, it was led by Albert Bandura. This is the time when psychology is mostly dominated by behaviorism, the idea that, humans are animals, and so our behaviors are going to be warranted by our reactions with our environment and our interactions with it. So stuff like from Pavlov and the dogs all the way up to this, where we're talking about now.
Because the question I'm asking that we're going through in different aspects is, are we born bad? Like, are we, why do people do the crimes? And so this is quite a big one, isn't it? Like, is it? Yeah. Is this the reason people do the crimes? What was happening?
It's one of them. Because the Bobo dolls, Bandura, what he did was he would show children these dolls, like the sort of like the big inflatable dolls, and you punch them and they wobble, but they don't ever fall down. So punch. He would have their parents or other adults in their lives sort of come in, and they beat up the dolls, and they'd be punching them and hitting them with toy hammers and things, and then they'd leave the kids in the room with the dolls and to see if the kids would replicate that violence, and they would. And this is a time also that's very crucial, important point. This is a time when television was becoming so people were now concerned about what their children were watching on TV. More and more homes were getting television. More and more parents were worried that their kids might see something that they would replicate. So a lot of work went into discovering, do kids do that? And it's later on, as we learn more and more, this issue becomes more and more complicated. But at the time, Ruby, they're like weebles. They were very based on the bottom and wobble a bit. So you could just keep punching. Yeah, they were those things, but they'd show their parents smashing them up and hitting them and being violent with them, and then they'd have the kids play with them, and most of the kids would be aggressive and violent towards them as well. And it sort of showed that, kids are learning like that. They learn from the people around them. It's not just, I can punch this thing and it doesn't fall over. So I can keep, it wasn't like that.
And crucially, it was an experiment, so there was a control group where they didn't do that and the kids didn't do that. So
kids were just given, in the control group, the kids were just given dolls to play with, I think. Just like regular dolls. They just played with them.
If I remember right, didn't they have the same inflatable doll, but the adult didn't attack it?
The adults, the adults were shown to be...
The child didn't bother to attack it either, and was a lot more docile in their play with the dolls.
Yeah, the adult would either play with other things, or they'd be happy with the doll and swinging it about and throwing it, or having a tea party with it. I don't think that's necessarily true, but they were generally sort of happier towards the doll. They weren't punching it and kicking.
So we proved that if you're aggressive in front of children behave aggressively, and
children are likely to pick up on that. Yeah, they did. But again, this is a very early on sort of study, so you could only really they didn't really understand the mechanisms behind it. They were still learning that sort of how that that behavioral norm and that approach sort of passes down, and it takes a long time. Kids have to grow up around it. It's not just one off in a lab and then suddenly that's it, they're aggressive forever. They have to be exposed to it repeatedly.
Well, I thought it was a really interesting experiment to basically say young people not see it on the telly. I know that the conversation was the telly, but what it proved to me was if you're around a child and you behave badly, then those children are likely to behave badly as well. And if we're asking where do crimes come from, who's doing the criminals, who are the bad criminals, are you born bad, then maybe people who consider their the youth around them to be bad, maybe they should be considering the actions of the people that... I blame the parents, but no, that's sort of an aspect of it, isn't it? That we have to be good examples to children wherever we can be, because otherwise they might pick up these bad ideas, and that's a basis.
But that was your basic first sort of discovery. It shit up a lot of parents about what their kids were watching on TV, but it also didn't account for the fact that children pick up stuff from other children as well.
And also that you say about TV again, the attitude of parents is it's on the TV, but at the time we're also talking about domestic violence. We're talking about the way you treat a child, whether you should hit it, them like a child. And it turns out after all this time, maybe we shouldn't be doing this violence in the home as a normalised thing, because it creates this further problem. So I wanted to sort of light on that. this other guy, this Isnak, and biological conditioning and nervous stimulation.
Right, I'm going to spell it out in the chat so you'll see it.
Isnak, Isaac,
Isaac.
He's got Isaac. I'm going with an actual I, not with an E-Y.
No, it's E-Y, yeah.
E-Y, like E or E-Sank. E-Sank.
Isaac. His son writes psychology textbooks, so it's kept within the family. But
right.
yeah, Isaac was looking specifically at psychopathy. He was looking at the development of psychopathy, and he's the one who reasoned that your responses to things like aggression and to violence, thus criminality, is governed by your biological responses. It's governed by how your biological response mechanisms have developed. So we're talking about your nervous system. And if your nervous system flares up a lot, you're likely to be, you're nervous, you're jittery, you're constantly on edge. But if it takes a lot to fire up your nervous system, you are therefore more likely to be impulsive and psychopathic, because you're going to be looking for excitement that thrills you. You're going to be looking for things that fire up your nervous system, and because those things take a lot, those things are going to be more and more extreme. So more and more extreme behavior is indulged in with people who don't really have like a not necessarily very responsive, but people whose nervous systems take a lot to kickstart are more likely to indulge in more scary and more extreme behaviors. So that's why some people might shit themselves about going skydiving, whereas other people fucking love it. Some people might shit themselves about climbing a mountain, but other people love it. Some people might shit themselves about diving, other people love it.
So this is like a purely biological thing that might lead to a psychological behaviour or a difference in social behaviour. But this one comes down to the idea that someone might just be have a higher tolerance for violence or excitement, or they need a big kick in their life to get them up and excited, and life doesn't provide. Hello, Rudy. I don't know if you are a psychopath. You're usually quite good in my chat, Rudy. I don't think
I should point out, liking extreme sports doesn't make you a psychopath.
No, yeah, and Rudy, I think you're usually quite good in chat, so I think you're all right. just chill. And I was going to say, yeah. So we've got this idea that there's maybe some of us biologically. Was this like scientifically, a valid idea, or was this one that was thrown out, like that some of us have more propensity to indulge in certain practices, and you can't. I was going to say as well, you can't find them in, like, you might become a boxer, or you might become a race driver, or you might become a criminal. Like, it's like one of these, because it gives you a big buzz. Like, is that?
Yeah. Like, basically, it's not necessarily an indicator that you're going to be a psychopath or you're going to be a criminal, but it is the same sort of thing. It's the same sort of basic principle, pushing both. You might become a boxer because you like being able to, be in a fight, or you might become somebody who just likes kicking off in the pub every weekend. So, yeah, it's been expanded on recently. There are other explanations of sort of tests for psychopathy in the years since, but Isaac is seen as still like one of the most important ones. He also wrote a book about Freud called The Decline of the Freudian Empire, where he sort of like looked at the scientific evidence for Freud's theories and basically picked them apart piece by piece. It's well worth a read. But yeah, Isaac's still taken, and he's a step along the way to more accurate and more like comprehensive diagnostic tools for psychopathy, like Robert Hare's PCLR checklist, the main standard for assessing psychopathy.
Without going too deep into psychopathy, then I was going to say, if that idea holds water, and we said that children emulate things around them, we could be in a situation where, like, there are some people who are more likely to become criminal or act in this way, depending on, like, if you have both these things, the nervous situation and a situation that you're living in where there's turbulence and all these things. Are we saying that there's, like, we could be creating a sort of like perfect storm for more criminal behaviours from a psychological and biological perspective? Like, you have a bit of both maybe sometimes. Yeah,
possibly, but those factors are incredibly rare, because you're considering a minority, a minor percentage of the population already when you're considering like what makes you a psychopath.
Okay, psychopath, yeah.
Obviously, it's on a scale, like.
Is it just psychopaths then? Because I was going to say, right, I think about social conditioning and stereotyping, and how I've written it as a note. I don't know if it's a proper question I can ask you, but you can harness this violence and this testosterone in these young men, and like this physical reason why people might be more prone to violence. And it's done. It's like that's the reason why you have child soldiers and other things. You know, so what we try and do in our Western society, like our answer to that, I suppose, is like I said, boxing or sport or some way of harnessing those same drives and aggressions and and putting it into something more constructive, I guess. But that's like so yeah. Is it that social conditioning and stereotyping? That was my point, really. I don't know if it's a question or not. What do you think about that? Is it that you can people don't have to become criminals; they can become legit members of society if we can just harness them right?
Yeah, I see you're remembering the scene from The Wire that I used during that bit of the video.
Yeah.
In the boxing, the guy sets up the gym, yeah. But think about how he gets the funding for the gym. He goes to Avon. He goes to the drug criminal, the kingpin.
That's what we were saying before. The criminal empire can be benevolent, can't it? It can be a socially benevolent factor in these circumstances, can't it?
And that's hence why it gets sort of like romanticized and fictionalized. But yeah, you can. Yeah. Channeling those sort of impulses, I guess, channeling those sort of biological urges and that sort of like biological aggression and the motivation in that way, channeling it appropriately it's much better than just sort of like letting it fester, or like putting somebody in a position where they're stuck being unable to deal with it. Like, I got a lot of physical aggression out when I was in a band, because I'd be playing bass or I'd be hitting the drums really hard. Because making music, making noise, and doing all that was an outlet. It was a physical outlet because it was an emotional one as well. It was emotionally exhausting, and in the same way that you would get from exercise, working out, from a couple of rounds of boxing, for a match of football.
So
any sort of like physical exertion in that way. Arts as well, yeah. From a purely expressive sort of emotional way, painting, sculpting, writing poetry, but anything that's sort of like is an emotional release.
Therefore, it seems no surprise that like people who end up going through the prison system come out quite a lot of the time. You see them doing interesting art, and a lot of rap music, a lot of from any culture where there's like a criminal basis, you also see some sort of like this other like the Krays were into their boxing as well, weren't they? Like I think I don't know if either of them did box or just supported the sport or whatever, but there's like and with The Wire, and that's a fictitious but also it's a true story sort of example, isn't it? The Wire. So like like there's this combination of if we could get it right in society, we could reduce crime, and even though there are these things feeding into it, even though there are these factors, we could harness it better, and we could give people better options than becoming criminals, I guess.
Yeah. I suppose that's sort of like the whole point of the criminal justice system as a whole. Sort of harness it and sort of go, look, we know you're in prison at the moment. You might have gone down for a violent crime or whatever. But while you're here, if you could do this, if you want to do this, we have these things available to you. It might help you when you get out. And that's what happens again in The Wire. He comes out of prison and he finds himself like, shit, what do I do? And he can't make a go of it in the gang, so he tries to make a go of it legitimately at his boxing club. But yeah, we generally channeling those sort of feelings, because they're all there within us. We all have testosterone. We all make testosterone, and testosterone is like associated with that sort of physical outburst, not necessarily aggressive or harmful, but physical outbursts, exertion, running, swimming, jumping, football, playing of an instrument, anything that's like physical exertion is sort of like powered by testosterone.
Yeah, I wasn't being patriarchal there.
No. But women produce testosterone as well, just not in the same quantity as men. So, even women feel the capacity for this sort of thing. It's just, it happens to be that typically we've had the view of things like boxing and football as being not only working class, but almost exclusively male. And again, biological reasoning aside, that's a social construct.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's based on a biology that we can't escape. Men have a different biology than women. We're sort of wired to do the more physical thing, of like running and hunting and the hunter-gatherer days going back to when we were in tribes again.
Maybe. I don't know if I totally agree with that, because the women around me like seem to do their own fucking running. And like, honestly, I imagine. Could you not imagine being in a hunter-gatherer tribe situation and being told, "No, you fucking gather the mushrooms, you idiot. I'm going out with the spears. And I want to make sure we get this antelope. So I'm going out with the spears. You're fucking gathering the mushrooms, you chump." And I'd be like, "All right."
I don't care who's holding the spear. That's the if they're telling me I'm on mushroom duty, I'm on mushroom.
Exactly.
duty.
I'd be told. The women around me. I'd be told, and I'd be on mushroom duty, and they'd be out there doing that. And I agree. I must say quickly, briefly about veganism is that there is an idea that we, generally were vegan, but other animals killed the things, like lions killed things, and then we chased the lions off, and then we sort of gathered up what was available, and that maybe we weren't that good with a spear overall anyway. But like the spears were just useful for chasing lions off quickly. There is a possibility of that until we did get sophisticated enough eventually, didn't we, to put those poor animals in the traps and the things. Anyway, look, I'm getting off the point anyway. Going back to crime, right? So now we're going to ask you some more broad question things. I've still got the same outline as was on that I sent you. So assuming I'm not missing anything up to this point, are there worse crimes than others? This is a more sort of general question. Are there worse crimes than others? And maybe make a list of all the worst ones, all the really bad ones, and say all the worst words on the podcast so it really fucks up the algorithm. Definitely don't do that. But like, are there worse crimes than others? And I think the answer is going to be yes, isn't it?
Yeah. Like we said at the start, some things have been like universally seen as crimes, so like the murder, the assault, the robbery, things that are the big ones. They're generally seen as taboo throughout most societies, so they usually carry the worst punishments as well, so like ostracization or exclusion, excommunication, if not execution. Those are the big ones. So yeah, there are some worse than others, I would argue. I mean, obviously you're not going to argue that like loitering and littering is an equivalent to like murder or like GBH or arson, but So yeah, for sure, right? So the flip side of that question is: are there good crimes? Like, are there any like crimes that aren't so bad? So therefore, like maybe good crimes is a further push, but like, are there any crimes that like if they're not the worst crimes, they're the best crimes? Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Like, what are the best crimes?
One of the first exercises we did in the criminology unit was like we were given a list of crimes and sort of like told to rank them like in what order we felt they were.
How good they are.
Like least worst.
Least worst.
But they weren't like
worst
murder and arson and that. They were stuff like like loitering in the wrong place. Or like they were like social transgressions, like chewing too loud in the cinema, or like talking in the library and stuff like that. So there were things that weren't necessarily crimes, but we still sort of like consider them social transgressions because they sort of like they violate a norm that we all think should be,
I suppose when
like
you consider how angry it makes you, like there's a difference there, isn't there? Like making some noise in the cinema might not be a bad thing, like in terms of worst crimes, but I might find it more personally like frustrating than somebody's loitering. Like so I might actually rank that higher. Like I see what you mean there. Like but okay, so like there are definitely like crimes that are not as bad as others, and like you have to
harmful,
maybe harmful. Maybe is that the way we're going to be defining it? Is like least harm to others, maybe? Because also I was then going to come on to: are there any good crimes, like victimless crimes or crimes against unjust laws? Like, I believe I was told somewhere once, but I've heard it said somewhere once that if a crime is if something's against the law but you consider it to be important that it shouldn't be, you should break the law. Like you should do what's right rather than what's socially taught as we should change these crimes from being crimes by breaking the law and showing that they're the right thing to do, or something like protest maybe in that way. Like she wasn't supposed to be riding on that bus with the people, but because she was black, and then she was like, no, fuck that, I'm getting on the bus. And like things like that were actually breaking the law, weren't they? But they were doing the right thing. So there might be some like, and like, I asked about victimless crime as well, just bundled it in there. But like, are there any good crimes? Like,
I'm trying to think. I mean, stealing from the rich is always good as far as I'm concerned, because I'm pretty sure Elon Musk is not going to go like wanting
I think if you say his name, then we definitely come up on artificial intelligence as well. Now they're going to be listening to our podcast. He's going to want to know what we said. So
that's Jeff Bezos, that man.
Oh god! Now we've got two different alternative artificial intelligences both listening to the podcast at the same time, vying for the most important information.
TV license is an interesting one,
right?
The TV license is an interesting one in chat from Bob Cassidy there, because, like, yeah, it's not paying your TV license, you know, crime, but your TV license also funds the national broadcaster. It provides a good. It's like a tax, you know. It provides, like, news coverage, with drama, with entertainment, with documentaries. It has a function, so you can see why people don't want and will rebel against the system by not paying. But it also does have a function, and it does have like an end goal. It does have an end product that is beneficial to society as a whole. So, you know.
here's another good, interesting question in chat. What about identity theft revealing the lies of a middle-aged eBaker? Like, that's a good question, though. Like, you know, morally.
Yeah, there you go. There's a good example of, like, moral
figures that we consider to be morally repugnant, and then we're breaking the rules of the land in order to hold them to account. Like that could be the same argued as like, what about, you know, trying to try Putin for war crimes? Like, he might say it's a crime to put him on the stand. Like,
you are sort of like pursuing a figure you feel is unjust, a figure that you feel has escaped punishment or condemnation or the consequences of their action for too long, and to achieve your aims of, like, actually seeing them held to account, you are willing to transgress some laws. And that's, yeah, it's the same basic principle. I know it seems weird to compare Darkseid for Putin, but,
sorry,
I mean, there was it's not a crime because there was no identity theft. You know, they didn't steal anything.
Yeah, that's true. There wasn't really a crime happened there.
There wasn't anything stolen. Remember, those things weren't stolen. Besides, that's debunked. That's never happened. And could you just lean in and ban him?
But the but the concepts are fitting, aren't they? Like, things that, like, we've managed to find a few examples here. And also, when I say about victimless crime, I suppose TV license is a crime against the state in a way. There are also people who maybe, like, commit crimes against their perceived the state, but they feel that it's unjust what the state's doing, and then there are victimless crimes. Like, maybe this pushes us on into a way to talk about, like, frauds and things like that, where, like, again, it goes back to that early thing. It does actually damage society, though, doesn't it? So is there really a victimless crime? Like, is there a category of?
I was like, I was trying to consider, like, white collar crimes and, like, sort of like.
Can I just quickly go to the bathroom while you talk? And
yeah.
You can answer questions from the chat as well while I'm not here for a second. Is that all right?
Sure, I'll talk to DSP. Yeah.
I could put a brief of madness if you want, or, like, you can carry on.
Good. You can go.
You can carry on answering, because I just quite like to go to the bathroom at this juncture, if that's all right. You can go as well if you want. We can put a brief of madness.
No, it's fine.
No, okay, all right. I'll be back in a second.
What up, YouTube? It's your boy Steve of the Dead taking over Grave Kipper channel for a bit. No, I am actually trying to think if there is a victimless crime, and I don't think there is, because, like, one of the key concepts of a crime is one of the key categories that defines it, that there's a victim. You know, any sort of, like, act that doesn't involve a victim isn't really a crime, because who are you robbing? Who are you transgressing? Who are you committing a crime against? There, so you need a victim and a perpetrator in order to have a crime. So in that regard, no, there isn't really a victimless crime. But really what the discussion should be is, like, which crimes damage the least and which damage the most, because that way, that's how you determine this is the one that requires the most severe and emphatic condemnation, and it warrants severe punishment, whereas these other crimes that we think aren't as severe don't necessarily require so much punishment. Like, even that's the thing, it's a victimless crime if the victim is barely affected. Well, I mean, like, passive smoking and smoking in public that's a crime. You know, if you smoke indoors now, you're in trouble. But if you're only in the restaurant that I'm smoking in for an hour or two, and I have, like, a cigarette, so there's one cigarette dispersed, that's it. You're barely affected, but it's still me smoking indoors, putting your health at risk. You know, I remember when I think he's called Alan Carr, not the TV host, comedian, the guy who wrote the books about quitting smoking. And he said, what about if I gave you a cigarette and I told you this is the one? This is the one that's going to give you cancer. You know, it might be that one that I smoked in the restaurant that triggered cancerous growth in you. But did it, though? Because, again, that it might be, it might not be. You don't know. But we have to assume that it is when we're considering the punishment that somebody gets for smoking indoors, because it's still putting you at risk. It might have been. And all those times when it's not, don't justify complacency for the time that it is. So, yeah. Smoking weed in your room, yeah, I agree. But even that has an impact, because there are people enslaved by the drug trade. If you illegally stream some pay-per-view media. I agree. Like I said earlier, stealing from the rich.
I'll join in again now. I absolutely stream boxing fights that I don't want to pay the pay-per-view. It's a fucking ridiculous pay-per-view. I'm not watching. If I have to
pay 50 quid to watch Logan Paul and KSI.
Exactly. I mean, I wouldn't even watch them anyway. But like actual pay-per-view fights that like aren't really worth the money. I would rather not watch them than pay the money. Yeah. So if I'm not watching them anyway, I'm going to stream them. Because I'm not going to fucking pay the money. It's not like they're losing out on me and my money. It's like, you know, I'm still going to watch it. So fuck it.
Eric Bots in chat.
Yeah. But yeah, that was.
Are those hot girls really free though? You
know. But yeah. So I'm back now anyway. So
yeah. No, we don't think there's a victimless crime.
We don't think there's a
crime
victimless
sort
crime.
of needs a victim by default.
So
you perpetrate, you need a victim.
So in terms of victimless crime, maybe not, but in terms of good crimes, maybe crimes against unjust laws, crimes in protest, I would say, I'm going to say are good crimes. Maybe there's and we'll come at the end. I want to talk about that a bit more deeply, so maybe I'll ask you this question a bit later. But you know, there must be a range of, eventually protest must become criminal. But like, are there any other good crimes that we could say? Like, would it be good? Okay, so maybe vigilantism. Would it be good to go and like grab hold of a pedo and sling him off a bridge?
Well, no, because we've already empowered people to do that. They're called the police.
Sling them off the bridges. They sling them off. They don't sling them off the bridge.
Go and grab them at least. I mean,
they grab them. Yeah, they don't sling them off the bridge.
Yeah,
but yeah,
we have like a sequence of events and a system that is supposed to deal with them once we catch them. You know, the police.
If someone grabs them and slings them off a bridge, right? I know that this is hypothetical. This is on the internet. I'm not suggesting we sling anyone off a bridge, but society net goal gain one less pedo. Right? Is pedo a bad word that the algorithm doesn't like? I say it all the time. Anyway, there's one less of them, right? So net gain. So definitely a crime because I've done a murder, but was it a good murder?
Well, who are you to judge that? That's the thing.
I'm judging the pedos, me.
I know, but we've got like the police and prison systems to do that. Would it not be better for that pedo to go to prison and then be like battered daily in prison?
maybe that. I don't know.
But
is it so? Wait. Is the hang on now. There's a question.
I don't agree with institutional violence either.
But here's a question: is what the police do technically like the same as a crime in a way, because they're sort of grabbing hold of people and taking them off the street and. You know, okay, we've decided they're allowed to do it. The only thing that allows them to do it is that piece of legislation. The actual action in itself, grabbing someone, taking them, kidnapping them, putting them in the prison, like that could be a crime if you weren't a policeman.
Yeah, it is. It's like kidnapping. It is a crime, yeah.
So, like, there's only one small thing that makes what they do not a crime and what we do. Well, I don't do any kidnapping. me and Derish are certainly not out there driving around on my. When I take him out on his driving lessons, we're certainly not. If you just like to pull away now, Derish. But what about the school? Yeah, just drive slowly. No, but I mean, what about the school? No, look. Right. Yeah, you know what I mean, though. People who are doing these, like, isn't it a strange fine line that one side is the law and one side is a crime, but they're the same behaviour? They could be considered.
Yeah, but that sort of like distinction also involves like becoming a policeman in the first place, going through all the training, make sure you've got all the qualifications, passing your background, getting into the force, you know, getting your pips on your shoulder or whatever. All of that stuff, and acting as an executor of the state, you know, and then you have to prove to, you know, I've forgotten who it is. You have to get a warrant, you know, to go and arrest someone. That has to be approved by somebody else. So you have to prove already that it's likely that this person has committed offence. So it's not the same as necessarily grabbing them off the street or like seducing them in a chat and then having them meet up with you. It's
Jesus,
very different. And,
here's a good tip for anyone listening in chat: don't meet up with anyone in chat.
Not that everyone in chat is a wrong un, but typically meeting people online isn't the safest of activity.
So, okay, we're going to now move on to the final section of. I've got like final two sections, which is topology, stereotypes, and myths. Who is a criminal, and how we get the message. Most people don't directly encounter a crime on a day-to-day basis. So, how do we see? How do we see the crime? Like, how do we get these feelings about it? Modern media prejudices and stereotypes. Let's talk about that. Who is a criminal, and how do we get that message?
That would come through again. Now, we have to consider two different types of media at this point. You have to consider you sort of fictional dramatization depiction of criminal. So stuff like in Cracker or The Bill or CSI or Law and Order, The Wire. People who are fictionalized that depiction, and your real life depiction, real life reporting, so news reporting of crime and criminals. So the people who were like say Joanna Yates or Holly and Isabel Soham, and the difference between the two, because the one is consumed primarily for entertainment, and as a result there's a suspension of disbelief, but there's also an acknowledgement that disbelief is suspended, so that this isn't necessarily 100% accurate depiction of people, but it does still inform attitudes because it's going to be the majority of material consumed. You don't necessarily read about every murder that happens in every newspaper, but you might watch your drama like Dexter, serial about a serial killer with a heart of gold or something like that.
So this goes back to what we were talking about last week, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The week before.
Broadly,
about, people's fascination with the media that involves criminality. And so that's where we're exposed to through the mainstream media, their versions and their visions of criminality, what supply and demand sort of media consumption system makes more prominent. And we're also showing the news, and on the news, as you say, you can't see every crime, so you get like a sort of like a match of the day highlights reel of some crimes that happen today. So we're not really exposed to that many true. Like as the normal people walking around in the populace, we don't see the crimes happening. We're not exposed to the true criminality, even through the whole big machine of the media. We're really just glimpsing through the door, maybe.
Yeah, we're only getting like a slight sliver of a glimpse at it, because even the media are going to be careful about which ones to pick and choose. Your newspapers and your news at 10 are going to pick the ones that they think sound like the most dramatic, or the ones that are going to get the most viewers or readers. So they're going to pick the ones that they can, for want of a better word, hype up themselves. The flash like headline photo on the front page, or they'll start the news with the bong and then the picture of somebody, or like the police sirens flashing as a like murder on the streets tonight. It's they'll be doing that sort of thing to try and get you involved, and that again is a distorted thing. It's just that this time there's no real suspension of disbelief. You're assuming that what you're being shown is inherently true because it's from the news. It's from your trusted media source, so you take what it says at face value.
And as you say,
when they report it and distort it, that can have an effect on your beliefs and your attitudes going forward when it comes to sort of crime or criminal.
And we're trying to sensationalize things and make sure people come back and watch the news, and the adverts in between the news, and you have these narratives that go on. I mean, we talk about Madeline McCann on this channel, and we're going to talk about you and I are going to talk about Christmas special John Benet Ramsey. So there's these sort of like ongoing narratives that function within the true crime. We talked about true crime as well last week. Let's move on a little bit to how media creates a criminal then through stereotyping and myth, and how we at home get that message of like, there's criminals out there and this is who they are. Because last week we talked about, also the week before, I need to find a way of saying the other week.
Last episode.
Yeah. We covered why people like true crime, so we know why people are into that. But there's this. We've seen that the media aren't able to show us the realities of crime, so instead we get this other thing. And this is where we might move on to this idea about reefer madness that I mentioned a minute ago. Like, you know, how does this media play into this game at this point?
Well, here you're still sort of like Stanley Cohen, Folk Devils and Moral Panics era, because
this is where we can bring him back in, isn't it?
Yeah. Because the media is going to sort of like pick what it thinks can excite people, and if it can whip it up into a storm, then great. And it's not even necessarily just like murder or like the serial killers or anything like that. It's stuff like I mentioned earlier, acid house and ecstasy. This was just a bunch of kids taking ecstasy and listening to rave. You know, they go to like car parks and fields and things.
So yeah, okay. Now I totally see what you mean there as well. Now, because at the time it was music, it was the Shaman, it was the Prodigy, it was raves in fields, but it was also documentaries about people taking killer drugs. And Leah Betts is dead, and she's on the fucking front of the paper and the news, and this is her face when she died of ecstasy. And like, it's also like this horrific criminal gangs making raves in fields, and now not raves in fields, they're crime enterprises that need lawyers, and people are getting all sorts of crimes happening there. And like, yes, you had this counter argument or counterpoint in the media. Instead of everything's all good, everything's all horrible. Like, yeah.
Instead of, this is just a youth subculture. This is a group of kids that like this sort of music, and they like, you know, getting high and dancing like bellends. And that's it. That's all it is. And like any other subculture, like thinking of Leah Betts specifically, and the amount of people that die of taking ecstasy. And she didn't die of ecstasy, did she? She died of increased fluid consumption, probably because of her dancing loads and taking ecstasy. But she drank loads and loads of water, and that's what killed her. Water toxicity. Yeah. So again, like the moment any sort of death happens, I mean, you know, a couple of moshes. I don't think people have died in mosh pits, but you know, they're not the most physically comfortable places to be. But even that sort of seen as why do you do that? It doesn't strike us as right, but it's like it's part of the subculture. It's part of the experience.
Well, talking of that subculture, then you've got Marilyn Manson at the moment. Is probably a bad example because he's been put up for like sexual not misconduct, like proper bad sex things. But I don't know what's going to happen with the court case yet, and I don't know anything about it. Yeah, bad sex things. But you know, even before Marilyn Manson, Alice Cooper or other rock stars of their ilk, Ozzy Osbourne, are almost criminals. They're almost doing like black magic, dark arts, biting the head off a bat, like almost doing things that are just to the point where you could say that's actually, you know, considered criminal. Like, you can't do that in public, indecent. You know, there was a move to sort of demonize the more black metal community, wasn't there? So yeah, it goes on.
To be fair, there's a big problem in black metal with Nazis, but then again, there's also a problem with juggalos and Nazis and furries and Nazis, and I think the problem is just Nazis in general.
There's a big problem with Nazis.
Yeah. But like again, like just like acid house.
It's furries and Nazis.
Like, I do not Google
furries and Nazis, but why would they be?
Not kidding.
I don't know why the two. Like, what a strange. I suppose it's like. I suppose it's one of those like with like, you know, peanut butter and Marmite or something, isn't it? And you're like, that shouldn't work. But you know, once you've got the costume on, or which costumes you wear? Do you wear a wolf costume or a like Hitler costume? Is it a wolfy Hitler or a Hitlery wolf? Like, you know, you got to decide which end of the spectrum you're coming from before you can move into the other, or do you just jump right in with both? Do you have to be anti-Semitic as well as enjoy like the company of animals, or is it that, you know, is it just the look of the thing? Like, for some people, it might not be I don't know. Let's not judge, or let's do judge because they're Nazis. Let's judge them. Let's judge them. Judge them bad Nazis.
Let's judge them.
Let's judge them definitely, but not the maybe not the furry.
Maybe we should get representatives of the furry community on to talk.
I'd like a cross section of the furry spectrum from anti-Semitic through to whatever the other end is of that spectrum. Like, very liberal, like the most liberal furry you can get. Yeah, we'll have a debate about race, but everyone will be a furry, and then that'll be ironic because they'll all be the same race. Like so.
But yeah, like Bob, I know like a lot of lefty metalheads as well. I think it's just generally it's a thing that crosses subcultural boundaries.
Yeah.
Because they're cunts and you can't get rid of them anywhere. But well, you can. It just typically involves a war and the decimation of several. Maybe we should just like punching them.
But yeah, so
Kennedy said. But yeah, even punk's a good idea as well. Punk's a good example of a youth movement that was criticised.
We're quite good at demonising the youth as well, aren't we? We're quite good at saying like this is different, this is modern and novel. As again, you said about phones, we're talking about computers as well. Like computer games were violent and were going to be bad for you, and all this bad stuff. Hackers are bad. Like there's always a way of like sort of putting a bad spin on things that people. The media are quite responsible for sort of sensationalizing stuff, creating a big. Like, it's really just going back to Stanley Cohen again every time, isn't it? They want some big sensational scare thing to be going on so that they can sell a lot of papers. In our generation, we had pedos as well, didn't we? That was. I mean, obviously, pedos are bad, but like,
James Bulger, aren't we?
Yeah, it was like all of a sudden it was like. Every paper, every news story, everyone around the corner was a pedo, and like it was like a witch hunt against. Like, not that it's a bad thing to witch hunt those people, or maybe it is a bad thing. Again,
it depends. Do you want to be seen as like endorsing vigilantism or not? That's the issue. It's like ostensibly as a forensic psychologist, I have to take the side of. No, we have a legal system for a reason. I'd also remember John Reginald Christie from last episode. I'm doing it now. From last episode, who was the guy who got his flatmate Timothy Evans, his tenant Timothy Evans, killed because he killed his wife, and then Timothy Evans went to court and was an innocent man.
Oh right, yeah. So
Christie was later found to be guilty.
But I will just.
There are mistrials. There are miscarriages of justice
around this area, though. Right, just for a minute. Like now we've got modern media and we've got YouTube and stuff. So you've got this like. Counterpoint even to that, haven't you? Because like you've got people who videoed, like they've like, I've got all the chat records, this is the thing, are you this person? Right, we've got you on video, and like they're filming it while they're doing it, and like that vigilantism, honestly I think what's good about it is they know where the lines are drawn now. So they're like, we're going to wait for the police, you're in citizen's arrest, if you want to talk to us, we've got all the chat logs, why don't you tell us what you've been doing? And everything they say is now incriminating them. But there are some. I guess it could open up grey areas. But vigilantism is definitely a bit of a grey area. I mean, obviously, I don't think vigilantism is generally good. No, but I can see where sometimes you could watch that video and think, "Fuck that." You're not thinking, "Fuck those vigilantes." Yeah. You're thinking, "Fuck that pedo." What a dickhead. Yeah. So
see, that's the thing. When it gets results, it gets results. But that's not always the case. So sometimes you get the wrong person. And you've ruined a life. It's a difficult thing. And ostensibly, if you did that legally, if it was found that there had been a miscarriage of justice, and you who were sent to prison for this crime that you didn't commit, you would be rewarded. There would be some way for you to be compensated for that. Whereas with vigilantism, you don't have that framework either. Not only is your life ruined, you've got no way of like reclaiming or like getting compensation.
Yeah, you've got to have a system, but like some of these cases seem pretty watertight, don't they? So it seems like people like also it's like a feature of like a film, like maybe like in a film you might have a character who's the underdog, they're done down, and then eventually like I don't know, like in a kung fu film they might chop off someone's head with a sword, and you're like, yes, well done, you killed the bad chuffer and now you're the good chuffer. But they've just done a murder, like like so like we do get behind these underdog figures though, don't we? Like,
is a very strong cultural touchstone. Again, you've got Robin Hood who was for the rich take it to give to the poor, because the poor were being unfairly taxed and the rich were getting richer, and they're reflective of social anxieties and worries about the inadequacies and inefficiencies of a law enforcement system and a judicial system.
So yeah, before we move on or off this topic, we're mentioning how Reefer Madness, we're going to dig into that a little bit. But before we get off this one, it's like there are heroic villains, aren't there? There are anti-heroes. There are people who go against the grain, and like you say about results, and I was saying earlier about honor codes. We actually have films where the hero is a baddie, does a crime, does some crimes, and whether it just be shooting all the baddies or whatever it is. Like we do have that concept, don't we? The media's not always trying to demonize everyone, as we said before, with mods and rockers and folk panics and whipping up frenzies and stuff like that. It's not always trying to do that. Sometimes the media, en masse, everyone in the media, everyone that works in the media is responsible for this exact thing. But sometimes the media actually create heroes out of people who can be heroic in their action, even though they're criminals.
Yeah. Look at the Great Train Robbery. Look at how we view them now.
Oh, my granddad used to say, he used to tell stories about them playing Monopoly and, with the real money, as if like heroes, like, well done, like they've got loads of money. Like, my granddad was not a criminal, but like the fantasy of walking away with all that money and just being from the working classes, yeah.
Yeah, it's an intoxicating fantasy, but at the same time, they were armed robbers. They held up a train.
Yeah.
So, they held up people. So, yeah, they were criminals by that logic as well. So, yeah, they're things that we've struggled with for a while, and I don't think they're exclusive to British society. Obviously, Batman, creation, American, other societies deal with the issue of vigilantism as well, because no justice system is perfect, and not every decision will be seen as acceptable by everyone in society. Some people will think people got off too lightly, where other people are like, judges constrained by legislation that says to him, they've pled not guilty and gone to trial, you can sentence them to this degree, but if they've pled guilty or taken a plea deal or whatever, then you can only give them this much. So, I mean, like here over here, if you plead guilty straight away to avoid the hassle of a trial, you're automatically 25% off your sentence. So,
going back to this idea then that you're still doing crime, like, it almost goes back to this crimes of passion thing as well. Is sometimes I think like some people do things and you can think, well, I can see why they do that. Like they might have done the bad crime, but they were faced with this bad situation. So like and also it comes down to like a sort of gentleman's, or maybe that's being patriarchal. It certainly is actually, because this is where the code comes from, of like a gentleman's honour code, where if someone spills your pint in the pub, you're quite right to go outside and punch them in the nose. Like there's like a sort of lines are drawn where well, I'm not going to call the police on this one. We're just going to meter out some social justice right here with our fisticuffs. Like, and you're on the side of the people doing the fisticuffs sometimes because that chuffer's just done this thing. And like, how dare they do this thing? Like,
it's not necessarily illegal, but I don't think you'd get that severe a sentence if you punch someone who was cutting in front of you.
Well, no, maybe not someone who's cutting in front of you, but if you're in the pub and someone like grabs some woman's ass in front of you and like they kick up a fuss and like someone punches the chuffer, you'll be like, well, they grabbed that woman's ass, they got punched. Like let's carry on with our evening. Like, do you know what I mean? I know that I don't go around
that's like sexual assault.
Exactly. Do you know what I mean? Like, so you would think they were the bad chuffer for doing that thing, and that's why the fight started. It's not always the case that like that's why in Britain so many fights kick off in pubs and places, is because people feel quite compelled to just say, right, this is the social line that's been crossed. I'm quite right to punch this person in the face because this is how we fix social justices. And people would rather that than stabbings and this and that. They'd say, no, you should take it out and have a little fisticuffs and write it like a man. Like, I'm being kind of funny in the way I say it, but like, and I don't meter out social justice by being the big chuffer, but there is a line drawn where I would have to say, oh, hang on, I don't think this is going to happen anymore. I'm going to have to, like, we'll call the police, but in the meantime, like, I would have to step up and maybe throw some fisticuffs, like.
There is something a bit like Victorian gentleman about it, isn't there? There's agreement of if we have a disagreement, but it's not necessarily illegal to disagree about this thing, but we need to sort it out between us. Yeah, it's very like,
and it can often be quite petty things, which is why like it can break out.
Little petty things, yeah.
It's why it can break out at the back of a Weatherspoons every now and then. Like it's like because some little petty thing is enough for some people to say, right, well, let's do some fisticuffs. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying it's funny the way that crime. We've talked about crime for like a good 2 hours. We're going to finish off with the modern examples of cannabis, immigration and protests and our rights and things like that. But it's interesting just to think about the way that as a society we still have this grey area where we're quite quite a lot of us would say there is a line. I think most of us would say, okay, so someone comes up and they do this, and someone comes up and they do that, and eventually we'd find something. You would say, no, I would push them away, and if they wouldn't stop, I would punch them in the face. You know, and like we've all got a sort of line where we would tolerate, but we'd quite happily become the criminal if we felt that it was socially the right thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody has like a personal moral code. So everybody has like their own definition of, well, I would step in at this point. So, yeah. Those are generally like more social things that don't require legislation, though, not necessarily like murder or theft.
No, we're not actually going to throw people off a bridge. But yeah, like, it's just interesting. Yeah, so this is why coming on to these final 3 points that we that we should talk about, I suppose, that I've got to talk about here. As I cough from my smoking, cannabis, the drugs trade, a modern prohibition. Like, obviously, cannabis is criminal. I smoke it. I'm happy. Like, I'm not happy to say. I'm not promoting it on camera, but you know, it's a fact of life for me. So I don't feel like I'm a criminal, but I'm a criminal. So what's going on here in our modern world?
I think we're behind. I think we're behind the times, and this is one of the areas where it does, like you mentioned before, sometimes people feel a moral imperative to break a law because they feel that law is unjust. And I agree with you on this. This is one of those where I think, agree with the law. I think the law is out of order, not kept up with science and the modern social attitude towards cannabis. Because where I live, it's a very popular smell around the town. You can pick up a couple of different strains as you go through the shops. It's quite nice.
In some ways,
actually.
In some ways, I don't actually feel like a criminal because I don't feel like I get policed. Like, I don't think I'm doing anything like wild to need police. I'm not out buying off some street dealer. I might have a small network of friends and doing things nice and quietly. Now I've said it on the internet. It's not so quiet, but you know what I mean. Like, I don't feel like I'm.
You might know what.
I don't go out and become like some criminal of a Friday night because of anything. I'm a quite normal person, so it's interesting that like I'm definitely a criminal, like, and so I guess you were saying you also feel the same sort of way. It's like a modern prohibition. Interestingly, you can actually grow it in this country if you're a great big chemical company or like a pharmaceutical company. Like, you can grow great big crops and ship them around and do your drug trials and things like that with them. They're growing in warehouses and
correctly. You can apply for a license to do it.
Yeah, so it isn't completely illegal. But you have to be at the right end of the spectrum to be able to do it, and it's not really for like recreational consumption. So like, I guess I'm moving on from that. We just mentioned it, I suppose, unless you've got anything deeper to dig into it about it. Like,
I just, like I said, I think it's one of those things where across the world you can see more and more countries moving towards decriminalisation of it. And even fucking America's doing it.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're behind this, and the attitudes of the people currently in power here is actually, we think we don't treat it seriously enough. We think we want to punish you more for doing it. Is fucking ludicrous to me. And one of the two opposition parties, the main two, one of them is headed by like Diet Tory Light, so it's unlikely that he's going to say, actually, I agree, I think it should be legal for you all to smoke a spliff in the public park. And the others fucking electorally gutted by hopping into bed with the Tories in 2010. So, yeah, I think we're knackered for a bit, mate. And I think when you could sort of like look at social issues like, say, gun legislation or the right to an abortion, and think, we're the way we are compared to America, I am happy with. And then you look at cannabis and think, actually, America's doing it better than us. And that's not to sort of like slag off our American viewers, who are the majority of viewers here. So. I don't mean to insult you, but
yeah, we'd rather not have guns and abortions and no abortions.
Yeah,
we're happy with no guns and abortions.
Yeah, abortions.
I just said, where am I going with this now? Combining the babies coming out with guns. That's what I'm looking for. That's the main.
But yeah, I think there are some. Like, typically holding a progressive stance on these issues is considered like either being in favour of more gun control or like wider access to abortion. And increasing access to cannabis, increasing or legislating cannabis. Those are considered progressive attitudes, and I think I'm fairly progressive.
In the UK, then, from what we were talking about, in order for that to change, there's one thing I'd like to sort of point out is that I think, when you see like a rally or a march on the news, and quite often it's a very hippified sort of group and crowd, and there's a lot of, if there's public smoking of it, there's a lot of cannabis paraphernalia, there's a lot of sort of maybe dreadlocked, peace pipe sort of hippie. You see these images on the news, yeah? And what I'd rather see in a march like that was like normal, everyday people just, being normal, everyday people, so that there's not this stigmatization about it. But it must permeate so far through society. What do you think it would require for it to be changed? Like, what would be required of society for them to discuss it in the House of Commons and say, we'd like this to be a legal thing?
I don't know, because it just seems like the people in power at the moment are the ones who have the least interest in making it more available.
Yeah, well, they like to keep criminalised.
Consumers of the Colombian marching powder.
Yeah,
but when it comes to having a smoke, yeah, no, they're not up for it.
Is it possible that cannabis, like other things, can criminalise the working class? That it's a more working class pursuit to be, smoking, and therefore, if you, what you suddenly can't do is you can't drive around and just stop by a bunch of young lads and say, "Oh, I can smell cannabis." Right, you're going to need to be searched. You remove a policeman's tool to just no, I could smell cannabis, so I searched them. Who can prove that you could smell what? There was no smell of cannabis, and all that business. So that's all gone out the window. And then the idea that it would be legal and some people might make money off it legitimately is seen as a good thing in economic terms. But I wonder if they worry that the people who are more set up to do that might be from these criminal classes, in inverted commas, and therefore by decriminalising a certain class and giving them an economic fuel, they might in some way destabilise, they take their foot off the neck of these people in some way.
Yeah, because it's this is a way that you might control the population by criminalising them, and you're suddenly removing that. So yeah, how else do you keep them under control from that point on? It could very well be that. It could be a very political thing in terms of it being a thing of the lower classes. It could be a racial thing, because more ethnic minorities might be susceptible to smoking it, or at least being searched on evidence, on suspicion of it. I have this is anecdotal, but I have a friend who's a black guy with dreadlocks, and another friend who's regular. And we were coming back from Amsterdam, and the black guy with dreadlocks said, "You want to get anything through?" Not that I'm saying that we did, but he said, if you want to get anything through, the way to do it is put it in his, pointed to the white friend, and do it is put it in his socks, stash it on him, because I guarantee you'll get through, I'll get searched. And as we went through an airport in the northwest, he got pulled to be searched, and we got through. And it's there are racial biases in policing as well. We can't deny it. There are biases in policing in that way as well. So it's possible that's another reason. There are multiple reasons why, but typically the political taste for it is that we shouldn't be seen to be soft on drugs. We have to be hard on drugs.
And marijuana gets put in with all the drugs, but actually to separate that a little bit, it's interesting, since we're talking about crime and finishing on these sort of ideas, is that we're a small island and things have to get on our island. So talking about the Colombian marching powder, that has to actually come from Colombia or somewhere, somewhere like that, and be brought on shore. So there's a crime in smuggling it in, and it's usually done by criminal organised gangs. And that, at the moment, in our current political climate, is being talked about in terms of immigration as well, that these people are smuggling these people over to be part of criminal gangs to sell cocaine. So that goes hand in hand, doesn't it? Is it possible that there's a sort of border control, immigration, folk panic?
Possibly, yeah. But that has always been the case as well. Those fears have always been stoked because we're an island nation. So it's easy to stoke those fears. We're not a landlocked nation where we have fluid borders that have changed over time. We have a definitive terrain. We have a definitive area of country. So that's a thing that's been tightly controlled, because it's a bit like with Australia and how you can't take certain plants in there because their ecosystem is sort of fragile. It's the same sort of thing here. We have, except like now grows here, so it's like mostly rock and rain. So we still have
as well,
an island sort of.
In terms of modern, like we talked about all these sort of ideas about who is a criminal, where criminals come from, how they're made, whether it turns out a lot of it is society's making them. Like society's either providing the situation where people decide to do crime. We're not saying they're born bad; they're just bad people who just like out the womb have got the devil in them, and like, you know, that's very, very rare. And if so, you could even be in circumstances where it doesn't play out like that. But what does play out more often than not is it's a social circumstances, some sort of social things, and it's our perception of it through this media thing. Coming back to the immigration thing, is it the case that you know, like Cohen's moral panics, is this the new criminalized group that we're to fear, and you know, are we turning these immigrants into criminals? Is that what we're doing? Like, do you think through our media endeavors and stuff like that?
Possibly, yeah, because the ways that you sort of stoke fear about immigration is they're going to take your legitimate reason. They're going to take like your legitimate employment. They're also going to take the things that you're entitled to, like your benefit. They're going to take up benefits. And
benefits is a tradition,
you know, they're also going to take they're going to represent a threat to order as well, because you don't know who's coming in. Criminals could be in there.
I think, you know, these days as well, it's almost like as bad as the old Saracens and sorry, I was going to say it's almost as bad as like the old Saracens, where they're coming over to rape your wives and pillage your children or something. Like they're seen as these, like the worst criminals are being put over on boats to come and work in drug gangs, like, you know.
Yeah, but they were though, like the Norsemen of old, Vikings.
Like those people actually maybe did some pillaging, but yeah,
pillage. So yeah, we had like legitimate reason to be scared of them.
But these
like,
days,
nowadays, they just want to like come and work. Like
people who are coming over on a dinghy in the north, like they're not like. What I was trying to drive at is that people who are coming over on, like, you know, human traffic dinghies and stuff, they're not necessarily coming over here like the Norsemen, are they? So
no. They're not coming over here with intent to conquer. No, they all they want to work in petrols. But
as they land on our shores, they are a criminal and are created and kept as criminals by us, I guess.
Treated as criminals. They're not necessarily criminals, because you know it's not illegal to sort of claim amnesty.
Not yet.
Be a refugee. Not yet, no. But as of this broadcast moment, yeah. But we treat them as such, because such are the fears that have been stoked in population that the people who are now in charge are susceptible to those fears. Our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
Yeah, this is what I'm driving at, really. Yeah.
So, you know, she had a dream, and her dream was putting them on planes and sending them to Rwanda. So, you know, that's an attitude that comes from somewhere, and to see it from somebody who herself, like her parents are immigrants, is very like, where have you picked that up from? So you have to look at the media at that point, and yeah, we go back to the going once again, how the media has whipped up this idea of immigration. It happened I think it was like maybe 10 years ago, I think maybe more, when Romania and Bulgaria joined the EU, and when they joined the EU, they therefore, you know, became eligible for freedom of movement. So anyone from Romania or Bulgaria could then move to any EU country, including us.
Yeah.
So media at the time lost their shit about the idea of all these Romanians and all these Bulgarians that are coming over to take over your town and take your jobs and all that, and no one did.
I used to do one lady's hair who was Romanian. She worked in a restaurant in our town, and I knew one person. It's interesting as well. Like, we have the same thing with Turkey in the EU. That was a reason to do the Brexit, is the fear of the Turkish people being part of the EU. Yeah.
Never mind that Turkey had no intention of joining the EU and wasn't even applying to be in at the time.
To the British voter, it was that Turkish people would just move in next door and they'll be free to just move in to our country, so to speak, wasn't it? It's this moral panic again, this fear of of immigrants and immigration. Another really funny thing about immigration that I always want to alight on is if you look into the statistics and the numbers of babies that are born in our country into poverty situations and immigrants, like there's a lot more babies being born, and they automatically, qualify for hospital treatment and benefits and all that stuff. And if you want to fix these numbers and worry about the burden on society, we should probably fix poverty rather than worry about a very small percentage of people who are coming in on a boat. But bringing that round to now these other aspects of protests and lawmaking. I put when ecology meets criminology, because at the moment we've got people literally out in the street on the motorway, and they're protesting because, we said at the very start, protesting is important. It's how we interact with this system. Sometimes we all have to come together and say, we want you to talk about this in the Houses of Parliament. So it was good for changing attitudes towards slavery. It was good to changing attitudes towards equal rights for women. It was good to changing attitudes towards voting for women. Protesting is important. And now they're out protesting about the environment, but they're criminals, aren't they? We're arresting them and taking them away for their bad protests. So should protesting be illegal?
Well, ostensibly no, but when you look at the things that are protested against, it's always a powerful institution that is being protested against, whether it's legislative or it's political or it's economical. And in this case, it's very economical business that's being threatened here. It's the gas and the petrol industry, the fossil fuel industry. So it's an industry that's threatened, but it's an industry that holds a lot of sway. So if it wants people protesting its activity criminalized, got a better chance of that happening than if we were protesting something much lesser, say how the current laws on cannabis. Go outside you can go outside Downing Street and protest about cannabis not being legal, and nobody's going to care, but because there's no major industry to be threatened here, got a lot of money behind fossil fuel. So I mean, that's my cynical take.
Yeah. My worry is that without a full understanding of how crime is, like what we've been discussing today, these ideas about how crime is formed, like where it comes from, you could just say that people are out there doing bad things, look at them being disruptive, so it's obvious they should be treated with by the police. You need the police to deal with these people, but that's a very facile way to look at it. And at the moment I think it's almost like a human right to be able to protest against or for or whatever you think. You should be able to walk in groups in the street and hold your placards and do things. And if we're not careful, we're going to criminalise something that's part of our democracy, and then we're into a very dangerous place, I would think.
Yeah, because again, if we're a democracy, ostensibly we're saying to people, you have the right to have your voice, and that should be done through voting and contacting your MP or your senator or whatever. But protest is a form of expressing your voice as well. It's you saying that the system has let me down, or the system is not moving fast enough, or the system is inadequate to deal with this issue. It is an expression of, look, you need to do something about this. This matter is too urgent to be dealt with the proper ways. Something like environment legislation might previously have been acted. Nowadays, it's taken too long to get stuff to do with solar energy, rechargeable cars, or wind power to be put forward. So protesting is becoming the way to do that at the moment, because it's seen like the system has failed. Seeing you're not doing anything about it, or it's taking too long because these are systems of justice, these are institutions of law and legislation, and they typically take a while, as we've said, unless they're something like a 9/11 or a developing technology that's allowed a sort of crime to develop, like with the upskirting thing that we discussed before. Those things sort of prompt quicker resolution, but something like this, it's hard to feel the effect of climate change except on those days where it's man, it's October the 31st and it's still t-shirt weather, or that sort of thing, or it's July and we're all burning. That's all. But yeah.
I just think as well. I've finished with. We're going to finish with a nice way to finish. And I don't have nightmares bit about stats, but there are some things that should never be criminalised in a democracy, and like your freedom to speak, your right to vote, the right to protest, like at least within a certain framework, like to gather and to voice your dissent, and maybe the right to strike if you're in a workplace environment and you're part of a union. There seem to be like human right things that should never become crimes, and specifically at the moment it's about global warming, and it's about ecological reasons that people are protesting. But through history we've seen when protests come up against authoritarianism, it often ends badly. Like there's enough examples of protests. There's university in America, wasn't there, that there were some shootings and deaths with protests.
Oh, during the 70s, there's that infamous girl crying by the God, I can't remember that.
And then of course there's even more authoritarian regimes with like Tiananmen Square in China. There are famous protests where it's ended badly for people. So I would think it's important that we would never criminalise protests. Sorry, you off somewhere? Oh, he's got the cat. He's got the cat.
It's going to end badly for her in a minute. She didn't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, I think it's quite important that we remember those lessons of history, and just like certain like freedom of speech, right to assemble, right to protest, things like that. If we put them up against authoritarian, we're mentioning it recently because it's Suella Benjamin's doing. I don't know if it would help this on the algorithm in any way for me to now be tying it into modern times, but Suella Benjamin is, and the right wing sort of idea is that you should be more restrictive of human rights and be more tight on these things, and actually I think it should be less than the other way. They tried to pass a bill where you wouldn't be allowed to bring loudspeakers to a protest, so that you couldn't have people talking on a microphone and things like that, and like I think it goes in I don't know if the right word is inviolable. We should have basic human rights, and they should be,
some rights should be guaranteed.
So I worry about that. You were going to say, to finish us off on something a bit nicer, something about statistics and crime, like what's the truth in reality then? Because what we found out as well, we've learned about how society creates criminals, how psychology has shown us that individuals can be prone to criminality. We've looked at interesting things like that, but we've also noticed that we don't get to view and see crime very often, and when we do, it's only a sliver through a crack of a door, or it's fantasy world and ideas and other ideas like that. I'll take that question in a minute, Bob. Finish us off with some stats though, and then I'll take Bob's question.
Well, statistically, most of us aren't going to experience crime. We're not going.
Well, that's good then.
Crime is overall falling.
Right.
Pretty much all types of crime are falling. So most of us are going to be fine.
Does that mean that the police aren't catching the criminals and reporting it, or is it that they are actually falling?
No, they are actually falling.
So and like that is a good point, isn't it? That most of us, if we have encountered crime, like if it has affected us directly in our lives, it's a big thing that we remember, and it's not that it's happening hopefully all the time, quite regularly. Statistics would bear that out.
Yeah, most of us aren't. Even though crime is obviously happening, it's just too many of us.
So if there's a funny noise downstairs at night and you have to go around the house with a hammer, it's the cat every time. It's always Slick Crime Watch team. The trolley problem, right? Yeah, so I am aware of the trolley problem. The trolley problem is that you've got a train and it's moving towards some people. Oh no, it's going to kill like 2 people, but you could or 5 people or whatever. I think it's 5, isn't it, or something like that. But you've got a control. You can flip that switch. If you flip that switch, you don't kill those 5 poor people. Instead, you just kill like 1 person or lesser number of people. Do you flip the switch and effectively, by being an agent in the action, become a murderer, but you saved people, but you murdered some others, whereas before it was just going to happen, and you were not to blame. So I'll ask you first.
Well, by your inaction, are you also not condemning those 5 to death when you had the ability to save them?
I guess you could say that, yeah. You could say that.
I would flip the switch and save, kill them. You know, the one would understand why. You know, yeah, they'd like work with the 5 remaining to establish the survivors fund, the one ended.
I suppose if you did flip the switch like that, those 5 people are going to be like, "Oh, thank God you saved my life," and like, you know, then you've got 5 people who all think that you saved their life. Whereas if you don't, then no one's going to say, "Oh, thank God you saved my life." They're going to say,
one will.
No, but they won't. They'll just say the train was going that way anyway.
Yeah.
You didn't do anything.
You switched it, but didn't.
Yeah, thank you for sort of saving my life, but not murdering. Thank you for not murdering me is different from thank you for saving my life.
It's a nice way to tie it up, because we mentioned utilitarianism earlier, and again, you're looking at the action that causes the greatest good, greatest number of people, and flipping the switch. A utilitarian perspective would say you would like inherently flip that switch, because your inaction is going to cause suffering for more people than flicking the switch and killing one would, because at least that is causing greater benefit to a greater number of people. So
I'm going to have to say this and then qualify it as a joke afterwards. Do we know what ethnicity the people are? Obviously, that's a joke. It's a joke. You know, I'd be indiscriminate when I was killing.
If you could ban 5 people, but one of them was Snow Carl, or ban 1 and know it was Derek.
That's it. If you could ask them a few questions about, you know, whether they're net good to society or not beforehand. No, you don't get that information, do you? You just have to bin them off at random.
One of them could be a Derek. You'd never know.
I did have a more funny question as well to ask that I just had on the top of my head then, but I wonder if you've got a favourite crime. No, we don't have to go there, really, do we?
Yeah, no.
Oh yeah, I've got a little signing off to do, haven't I? So yeah, we are over 3 hours. We've done a good episode, I think. If you've got any other questions in chat, you can ask them now. But you know, don't expect a big detailed answer because I'm about to do the sign off. We're moving towards. I don't need to do any plugging or anything like that. This is just an episode in itself. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being good, you chuffers. And at the end of every episode, I say, if you can't be good, you're naughty. So today's special episode means that if you can't be good, you're naughty.